Chapter 1. Wake. TK-346 regained consciousness to the sound of metal groaning somewhere deep inside the ship. At first, he thought he was still dreaming. The noise came in long, uneven waves that reverberated through the deck beneath him, like the hull itself was struggling to remain intact. For several seconds he remained perfectly still, eyes closed, listening to the distant screams of strained machinery and the crackling hiss of damaged electrical systems somewhere overhead. Then the pain arrived. It spread sharply through his ribs and shoulder the moment he tried to move. He inhaled through clenched teeth and forced himself upright anyway, one gloved hand pressing against the cold deck plating for support. Red emergency lights pulsed weakly through the corridor around him, illuminating drifting smoke and shattered debris in intermittent flashes of crimson. The air smelled like burnt circuitry, leaking coolant and blood. His helmet display flickered violently before dying completely. TK pulled the helmet from his head and drew a slow breath of stale, recycled air. His vision steadied gradually as he surveyed the corridor around him. The troop transport had been ripped apart from the inside out. Ceiling panels hung loose from exposed wiring, sparks spilling down in showers of blue light. Several sections of the wall had collapsed inward entirely, revealing twisted support beams and ruptured piping beneath the armor plating. Bodies lay scattered everywhere. Stormtroopers. Some still sat strapped into crash harnesses, lifeless behind cracked white helmets. Others had clearly been thrown across the corridor during impact. One trooper near the far wall had been crushed beneath a collapsed bulkhead so completely that only an armored arm remained visible beneath the metal. TK stared silently at the destruction around him, trying to remember what had happened. Fragments surfaced slowly through the fog, clouding his thoughts. Rain striking the hull before deployment. Sergeant Vask walking through the troop bay during descent. The violent shake of incoming fire. Someone yelling that shields were failing. Then, nothing. Just darkness. A calm mechanical voice suddenly echoed through the corridor. Warning, hull breach detected. The announcement repeated again in the same emotionless tone. Life support failure in sections 3 through 9. A pause followed before the final line came through the speakers. Priority mission remains active. TK frowned slightly. Mission. The word felt distant in his mind, disconnected from everything else. He remembered deployment orders aboard the Star Destroyer Vigilance. He remembered Black Echo Squad being reassigned shortly before launch. But whatever mission they had been sent to complete was buried beneath fractured memory and pounding pain. Another violent tremor rolled through the transport, knocking loose debris from the ceiling. Somewhere deeper inside the ship came the horrible sound of twisting metal collapsing inward. The Judicator was dying. TK forced himself to his feet and moved carefully down the corridor. His boots crunched against broken glass and scattered shell casings as he stepped over the dead. Instinct kept his breathing calm despite the destruction surrounding him. Training overrode fear. It always did. Assess. Adapt. Survive. That was all that mattered now. He stopped suddenly beside one of the fallen troopers. Black markings stretched across the shoulder plate. Black Echo Squad. TK immediately crouched beside the body. Mikkel. Even through the cracked visor, he recognized the trooper instantly. Mikkel had spent the last 3 deployments complaining about Imperial ration packs and making sarcastic comments during combat briefings that somehow never earned punishment from Vask. Now he was dead. TK stared at him for a moment longer than he intended before standing again. There was no room for hesitation. Not here. Sergeant Vask had drilled that lesson into all of them years ago. Emotion got soldiers killed. The corridor ahead opened into the main troop bay, and the sight beyond it stopped TK cold. Half the transport had been torn open. Stars stretched endlessly beyond the shattered hull in complete silence. Debris drifted slowly outside the breach. Pieces of armor plating, destroyed cargo containers, fragments of TIE fighters spinning endlessly through open space. Far below the wreckage hung a massive green planet wrapped in violent storms. Orbit. The realization settled heavily into his thoughts. The ship had not crashed on a surface. It was drifting. TK stepped closer to the shattered hull carefully, staring at the planet below. He had no idea how long he had been unconscious. Hours maybe, possibly longer. Emergency power was still functioning in parts of the ship, but not for much longer. Another sound interrupted his thoughts. A footstep, soft, somewhere behind him. TK turned instantly, instincts taking over before conscious thought caught up. His hand moved automatically toward the blaster at his hip, only to find an empty holster. His rifle was gone too. That realization unsettled him more than the wreckage. He listened carefully. Silence returned for several seconds. Then another sound echoed faintly through the corridor ahead. Voices, not Imperial. TK moved immediately, advancing quietly through the damaged hallway until he reached a doorway overlooking one of the lower maintenance corridors. He pressed himself carefully against the wall and looked around the corner. 3 figures moved through the darkness below, carrying portable lights and blaster rifles. Rebels. One knelt beside an access terminal, while another watched the corridor nervously. "Power's unstable," one whispered. "We need to find the data core before this wreck tears itself apart." The second figure glanced deeper into the darkness, then moved faster. TK remained perfectly still. His first instinct was immediate elimination. Surprise alone would give him the advantage. Even unarmed, he could likely incapacitate at least one of them before they reacted. But then something farther down the corridor shifted. All 3 rebels froze. One slowly raised his rifle toward the darkness ahead. TK heard it too now. Footsteps. Heavy. Measured. Metal scraping softly against the deck plating with each step. The sound was too deliberate to be random debris. Too heavy to belong to a rebel scavenger. The footsteps continued slowly through the darkness, somewhere deeper inside the ruined judicator. And suddenly, for the first time since waking up, TK realized something far worse than the crash itself. Chapter 2. Ghosts. The footsteps stopped. For several seconds, no one in the corridor moved. The 3 rebels stood frozen beneath the flickering emergency lights, rifles aimed toward the darkness ahead of them. Even from his position farther down the passageway, TK-346 could sense the tension tightening between them. Fear did that to people. It sharpened silence until even breathing sounded too loud. One of the rebels adjusted his grip on the blaster. "Show yourself." Nothing answered. The corridor remained dark beyond the reach of their flashlights, filled only with drifting smoke and the distant groaning of the dying transport. TK stayed perfectly still against the wall. His instincts told him to move while the rebels were distracted. Close the distance. Eliminate the targets before they realized another survivor was behind them. The calculations came automatically, the product of years spent inside Imperial infantry training programs. He could already see the sequence unfolding in his mind. First rebel, disarm and break the neck before he could fire. Second, use the body as cover. Third, another sound echoed through the corridor, metal scraping against the floor. Closer now. The rebels reacted instantly. "Contact," one shouted. Blaster fire erupted down the hallway in violent bursts of blue light. The confined corridor amplified the sound until it became deafening. Plasma bolts slammed into the darkness ahead, illuminating twisted walls and hanging wires for fractions of a second before vanishing again. Then something emerged through the smoke. TK frowned immediately. Not human. An Imperial security droid stumbled into view, one arm hanging uselessly at its side, while sparks burst from the exposed wiring in its chest. Half its faceplate had been torn away during the crash, revealing glowing optical sensors beneath scorched metal. The droid fired wildly. Red blaster bolts hammered into the corridor walls as the rebels scattered for cover. One of them went down instantly. The shot caught him directly in the chest and hurled him backward against the wall. His rifle clattered across the floor as he collapsed motionless beside a broken maintenance hatch. The remaining 2 rebels returned fire desperately. Blue plasma tore chunks from the droid's armored frame, but the machine kept advancing through the smoke with mechanical determination. TK moved before he consciously decided to. He crossed the corridor quickly, grabbing a fallen E-11 blaster from beside one of the dead stormtroopers. The weapon felt familiar in his hands immediately, like a missing part of himself sliding back into place. The droid turned toward the rebels again. TK fired first. The bolt struck directly through the damaged section of the machine's torso. Sparks exploded outward as the security droid staggered sideways. One more shot shattered its head completely. The machine collapsed hard against the deck. Silence returned almost immediately. Smoke drifted slowly through the corridor. The surviving rebels stared toward TK with rifles raised. TK leveled his own weapon at them without hesitation. For several long seconds, neither side spoke. The woman standing in front kept her rifle steady despite the tension in her expression. Dark hair framed a face covered in grease and exhaustion. Rebel insignia had been painted across one shoulder of her worn jacket, though most of it had faded long ago. She studied him carefully, not like an enemy, like a problem. "You just saved us," she said finally. TK kept the blaster trained on her chest. "You boarded an Imperial transport. We scavenged a wreck. You're rebels. And you're stormtrooper." Neither statement required clarification. The second rebel, taller, leaner, carrying pilot gear beneath his jacket, took an angry step forward. "Lyra, don't do this. Shoot him." So that was her name. Lyra ignored him. Her eyes remained fixed on TK's armor. "Black Echo Squad," she said quietly. TK's grip tightened slightly around the rifle. "How do you know that name?" The pilot scoffed. "Because your squad has been burning worlds for the Empire the last 3 years." TK said nothing. Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him again. "You don't remember, do you?" The question unsettled him more than he expected. Before he could answer, the ship suddenly lurched violently sideways. All three of them nearly lost their footing as warning alarms screamed throughout the corridor. "Stabilizers failing," the automated voice announced overhead. "Orbital decay imminent." The pilot swore loudly. "Fantastic." Another tremor rolled through the transport, stronger than the last. Somewhere deep below them came the sound of collapsing metal, followed by a distant explosion. The Judicator was falling apart. Lyra lowered her rifle first. "We need to move," she said. "This ship won't stay together much longer." TK did not lower his weapon. "You expect me to trust rebels?" "No," she answered calmly. "But right now, surviving matters more than sides." The pilot glared at her. "You cannot seriously want him coming with us. He knows the ship layout. He's Imperial. He's alive," Lyra replied sharply. "Which is more useful than dead." TK watched the exchange silently. Something about the situation felt wrong. Rebels aboard the wreck already searching for something. Imperial security systems still active after the crash. Missing memories. And now Black Echo Squad somehow connected to all of it. The questions piled up faster than answers. Then another voice echoed faintly through the corridor. Imperial comm chatter. Broken by static. "Echo Squad report." TK froze. The transmission crackled again. "Survivors recover the asset." The pilot looked toward the ceiling nervously. "What asset?" TK slowly looked down the dark corridor ahead. For the first time since waking up, fear crept quietly into the edges of his thoughts. Because somebody else had survived the crash, and they were still carrying out the mission. Chapter 3. Black Echo. The lower decks of the Judicator smelled like smoke, coolant, and burned flesh. TK-346 moved through the corridor with his rifle raised, boots splashing through shallow pools of leaking hydraulic fluid as the damaged transport groaned around them. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead, casting broken shadows across the walls. Somewhere deeper inside the ship, metal continued tearing apart piece by piece. Behind him, the rebels followed cautiously. Not close enough to trust him. Not far enough to lose sight of him. TK could feel the pilot's eyes on the back of his armor constantly. Jax called her. Even without seeing the man directly, the hatred radiating from him was obvious. "You sure he's taking us the right way?" Jax asked quietly. No, Lyra answered. TK glanced slightly over his shoulder. The data core is 2 levels below command operations. Jax scoffed. Convenient. It's the truth. That's what Imperials usually say before shooting someone. Enough, Lyra said sharply. Silence returned after that. TK continued, leading them deeper through the wreckage. Every corridor looked worse than the last. Entire sections of the lower deck had collapsed inward from the crash, exposing twisted support beams and sparking power conduits beneath the walls. Fires burned uncontrolled in distant rooms, filling the air with heat and drifting smoke. The ship was dying slowly, but not fast enough. Another tremor rolled through the transport. The lights flickered. Then the automated voice echoed once more through the corridor. Priority mission remains active. Jax muttered under his breath. I'm going to start hearing that in my sleep. TK ignored him, though truthfully, the repeated message unsettled him too. Mission priority remains active. The phrase repeated endlessly throughout the ship like a prayer spoken by a dying machine. But no mission briefing returned when he tried to remember. Only fragments. Rain, blaster fire, vast shouting orders. Then darkness again. TK stopped suddenly at an intersection. The corridor ahead had been sealed shut by an emergency blast door. A massive black scorch mark stretched across the metal. Explosive damage. Can you open it? Lyra asked. TK stepped closer to inspect the controls. Maybe. He crouched beside the damage panel and removed the protective casing with practiced movements. Most of the circuitry inside had melted together during the crash. Jax folded his arms. Great. We're trapped. We're not trapped, TK said calmly. You sound very confident for a guy who woke up in a floating graveyard. TK ignored the comment and reached deeper into the exposed wiring. Years ago, Black Echo Squad learned quickly that surviving Imperial deployments often meant repairing equipment without engineers nearby. Vask used to force all of them through maintenance drills between missions. A soldier who relied completely on support crews became dead weight the moment systems failed. TK rerouted 2 burned connections manually. The blast door shuttered, then slowly began opening. Jax looked mildly annoyed that it worked. Beyond the doorway stretched another long corridor, disappearing into darkness. And bodies. Stormtroopers lined both sides of the hall. Dozens of them. Some had clearly died during the crash. Others had not. Lyra stepped forward carefully, her expression tightening as she examined the scene. What happened here? TK moved toward the nearest body slowly. Blaster marks covered the trooper's chest armor. Not rebel weapons. Imperial. Execution shots. A cold feeling settled into his stomach. Jax noticed it too. Your own people killed them. No, TK said quietly. Then he saw the armor markings. Black stripes. Black Echo Squad. For a moment, the corridor disappeared around him. A memory surfaced violently through the fog in his mind. Rain hammering against the hull during deployment. Mikkel sitting across the troop, Bay laughing about something Six had said. Kron cleaning carbon scoring off his rifle. And Sergeant Vask standing near the cockpit entrance, arms folded behind his back. Listen carefully, Vask had said over the roar of the engines. This mission comes directly from Imperial High Command. We retrieve the asset and return to the Vigilance. No deviations. No questions. Since when do we not ask questions? Kron had joked. Vask had looked at him for a long moment before answering. Since Command stopped giving honest answers. The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared. TK blinked hard. Lyra noticed immediately. You all right? He nodded once, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Then another sound echoed faintly through the corridor ahead. Static. A broken comm signal. Black Echo. The voice crackled through interference. Report status. TK froze. Vask. It was Vask's voice. Jax immediately raised his rifle. Someone's alive. No, TK said. But even as he said it, uncertainty crept into his thoughts. The transmission repeated again. TK, if you're hearing this, lower hangar. Static swallowed the rest. Lyra looked toward the darkness ahead. Friend of yours? TK stared silently down the corridor. Sergeant Drell Vask had survived impossible situations before. Entire platoons used to joke that the old clone couldn't die, even if Vader himself tried. But hearing his voice now felt wrong, because the transmission sounded distorted. Weak, almost broken. Another tremor shook the ship violently. This time the lights failed completely. Darkness swallowed the corridor instantly. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then, somewhere ahead, deep within the black corridors of the Judicator, something metal scraped slowly against the floor. Not a droid. Not debris. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving toward them. Chapter 4. The Hangar. Darkness swallowed the corridor completely. For several seconds, the only sound aboard the Judicator was the low groaning of the dying ship and the distant scrape of metal footsteps approaching slowly through the black. TK-346 tightened his grip on the rifle. Beside him, he heard Lyra shift carefully into a firing stance while Jax muttered something under his breath that sounded very close to panic. Then another tremor rolled through the transport. Emergency lights flickered weakly back to life. The corridor returned in fragments of red illumination. And standing at the far end of the hallway was a stormtrooper. No one moved. The figure stood motionless beneath the flashing lights, white armor stained black with soot and oil. One shoulder plate bore the dark stripe markings of Black Echo Squad. TK lowered his weapon slightly. Vask! Sergeant Drell Vask stepped forward slowly through the drifting smoke. The old clone looked worse than TK remembered. Part of his chest armor had been shattered during the crash, exposing scorched plating beneath. A long crack ran through the visor of his helmet, and his movements carried the stiffness of someone forcing himself forward through injury alone. But despite the damage, he still looked dangerous. Vask's gaze moved immediately toward the rebels. His rifle came up without hesitation. "Explain," he said coldly. Jax raised his own weapon instantly. "Easy, clone." "Pilot," Vask replied evenly. "If I wanted you dead, you already would be." "Try me." "Enough." Lyra snapped before either side could escalate further. Her eyes shifted toward TK. "Friend of yours?" TK nodded once. "Squad leader." Vask kept the rifle trained on the rebels a moment longer before finally lowering it. "Not out of trust. Simply calculation. The ship is breaking apart," he said. "We move now." TK stepped closer. "What happened?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed Vask's face. "We were boarded. By rebels." "No." The answer hung heavily in the corridor. Jax frowned. "Then who?" Vask looked back toward the darkness behind him. "I don't know." That unsettled TK more than he expected. Sergeant Vask always knew. During deployments across occupied systems, Black Echo Squad survived because Vask understood situations faster than everyone else around him. Ambushes, traps, shifting battle lines. The old clone processed more like a machine built specifically for it. Seeing uncertainty in him now felt wrong. Another explosion thundered somewhere below them. The deck lurched violently beneath their feet. "Lower hangar," Vask said immediately. "Now." No one argued. The group moved quickly through the collapsing corridors of the Judicator, descending deeper into the transport while alarms screamed overhead. Smoke thickened the farther they traveled. Several sections of the ship had already depressurized completely, forcing them through maintenance passages and damaged service tunnels to avoid open breaches. As they moved, TK stayed near the rear of the group, watching, listening, thinking. Questions kept piling inside his head. What mission had Black Echo been assigned? What was the asset? And why had Imperial troops apparently executed members of their own squad? Ahead of him, Jax moved beside Lyra, carrying his rifle tightly across his chest. "You trust them now?" he asked quietly. "No." "Then why are we following them?" "Because they know something. They're stormtroopers." Lyra glanced back briefly toward TK and Vask walking behind them. "So are dead men," she answered. Jax didn't respond after that. The lower hangar deck looked like a battlefield. The crash had ripped half the chamber apart, scattering debris and destroyed cargo containers across the floor. Emergency bulkheads had sealed sections of the hangar automatically during decompression, trapping damaged TIE fighters and troop transports behind thick blast doors. Bodies covered the deck. Stormtroopers, crew members, engineers. Some clearly killed during the crash. Others were not. TK stopped beside one of the dead engineers near the center of the room. A blaster wound burned directly through the man's forehead. Execution. Again. Vask noticed it too. His jaw tightened slightly beneath the cracked helmet. They were cleaning up, he said quietly. Lyra frowned. Cleaning up what? Before Vask could answer, Kron emerged from beneath a collapsed shuttle ramp, holding a datapad in one grease-covered hand. The engineer froze the moment he saw the rebels. Well, he muttered, that's new. Kron, TK said. The engineer blinked once before breaking into exhausted laughter. I knew you weren't dead. You're too ugly to die. Even Vask almost smiled at that. Almost. Kron climbed out from the wreckage slowly, limping slightly from an injured leg. His armor was covered in soot, and burn marks stretched across one side of his shoulder plate. You find the data core? Vask asked. Kron's expression darkened immediately. Yeah, he answered. And you're not going to like what was inside. The engineer handed the datapad toward Vask. The old clone read silently for several seconds. Then his posture stiffened. TK watched carefully. What is it? Vask looked up slowly. For the first time since TK had known him, the veteran clone seemed genuinely shaken. It wasn't a rebel extraction mission, he said quietly. The hangar fell silent. Kron looked toward the rebels uneasily before continuing. The Empire wasn't transporting intelligence. He paused. They were transporting us. Chapter 5. The Asset. The lower hangar shook violently as another explosion rippled somewhere beneath the judicator. Dust drifted from the ceiling in thin gray clouds while emergency sirens screamed overhead without pause. The transport was losing altitude now. TK-346 could feel it in the subtle shift beneath the deck plating and the growing strain inside the hull around them. The ship was falling, but no one in the hangar spoke. Not after Kron's words. They were transporting us. The sentence lingered heavily in the stale air between them. Vask stood motionless near the center of the hangar, datapad clenched tightly in one gloved hand as lines of blue Imperial text reflected across the cracked visor of his helmet. Even through the armor, TK could see the tension in the old clone's posture. Kron leaned against a damaged cargo container nearby, breathing hard from exhaustion. Tell me I'm wrong. Vask remained silent. That's comforting, Jax muttered. Lyra stepped closer toward Vask carefully. What exactly did you find? The old clone finally looked up from the datapad. Project Harbinger. The name meant nothing to TK, but judging by Lyra's expression, it meant something to her. Her face tightened instantly. That's impossible. Jax frowned. What is it? Lyra looked toward him slowly, almost reluctant to answer. A rumor, she said quietly. Rebel intelligence intercepted references to it months ago. Kron gave a humorless laugh. Well, congratulations. The rumors were real. TK stepped forward. Someone explain what's happening. No one answered immediately. The silence irritated him more than the confusion itself. Finally, Lyra exhaled slowly and looked toward him. The Empire has been experimenting on soldiers. TK stared at her blankly. Conditioning, she continued. Behavioral modification. Memory manipulation. Jax folded his arms. Basically turning troops into machines. We already are machines, Kron muttered. No, Lyra said. Machines can stop working. Her eyes shifted toward the dead stormtroopers scattered across the hangar floor. The Empire wanted soldiers who couldn't question orders even if they tried. TK frowned beneath his helmet. That's propaganda. Is it? Lyra asked quietly. Kron pushed himself off the cargo crate and limped toward them, holding out the datapad. There were medical logs inside the core, he said. Neurological evaluations. Memory reset protocols. Psychological compliance reports. TK took the datapad from him. Rows of Imperial files filled the screen. Project Harbinger authorized by Imperial High Command Black Echo Squad. Active Test Group. TK read the line 3 times. His stomach tightened. No, he said quietly. Kron rubbed grease from his hands onto his armor absent-mindedly. Wish I could say otherwise. Vask finally spoke. The mission briefing before deployment, his voice had gone quieter now. More distant. There wasn't one. Everyone looked toward him. The old clone removed his helmet slowly, revealing a scarred face lined with exhaustion and age. Sweat and soot covered his skin beneath the harsh emergency lighting. They told us we were escorting classified Imperial cargo, Vask continued. No details. No tactical overview. Just coordinates. Jax frowned. And you didn't question that? We're soldiers, Vask answered flatly. Not senators. But you knew something was wrong. The clone looked toward the dead, lining the hangar. Yes. Another tremor shook the ship violently. This time the lights failed completely for several seconds before emergency backup systems restored dim red illumination across the hangar. TK looked back down at the datapad. Medical diagrams filled the screen now. Neural scans, brain activity charts, long paragraphs of Imperial analysis. Then one line caught his attention. Subject TK-346 displays exceptional compliance stability following memory reconstruction. TK stopped breathing. Slowly, he read the sentence again. Memory reconstruction. His hands tightened around the datapad. No. Fragments flashed violently through his mind. A battlefield burning beneath heavy rain. Stormtroopers executing civilians against a wall. A man screaming for mercy. Then Vask shouting, "Stand down." The memory vanished instantly. TK staggered backward slightly. Lyra noticed immediately. What did you see? He ignored the question. More flashes hit him. Blaster fire inside a village. Children crying. Black Echo Squad walking through smoke. Then another voice. Cold. Mechanical. Memory reset approved. TK suddenly ripped the datapad away from himself like it had burned him. That's not real. No one answered, because all of them knew it was. The hangar fell silent except for the distant groaning of the collapsing ship. Then a new voice echoed suddenly through the overhead speakers. Calm. Precise. Imperial. Attention surviving personnel. Everyone froze. TK recognized the voice immediately. Commander Vorlin. Black Echo Squad has been classified as compromised Imperial property. Jax raised his rifle instinctively toward the ceiling speakers. Vorlin continued without emotion. Recovery teams are now inbound. Kron swore quietly. Any surviving members of Black Echo are ordered to surrender immediately for transport and debriefing. Vast's expression darkened. Then Vorlin delivered the final sentence. Non-compliant assets will be terminated. The transmission ended. Silence returned to the hangar. TK stared blankly ahead for several seconds before finally speaking. They called us assets. No one corrected him, because no one could. Chapter 6. Recovery Team. No one spoke for several seconds after the transmission ended. The only sound inside the hangar was the distant groaning of the Judicator as the crippled transport continued tearing itself apart in orbit. Fires burned across the far end of the deck, sending black smoke curling upward into the darkness above while shattered TIE fighter wreckage drifted slowly near the open breach in the hull. TK-346 stood motionless near the center of the room, the datapad still clenched tightly in his hand. Asset. The word kept echoing through his thoughts. Not soldier. Not trooper. Not human. Asset. Something cold settled deep inside his chest. Across the hangar, Jax broke the silence first. Well, he muttered, adjusting his grip on the rifle. That sounds incredibly bad. Kron snorted quietly. You think? Lyra ignored both of them. Her eyes remained fixed on Vask. What exactly is a recovery team? The old clone didn't answer immediately. That alone worried TK. Finally, Vask slid the datapad into a pouch of his belt and looked toward the upper hangar entrance. Imperial Special Operations. Jax frowned. Stormtroopers? No. The single word carried enough weight to silence everyone again. Vask continued calmly. Special operations units don't retrieve prisoners. They erase problems. Kron leaned back against the cargo crate, which means we officially became problems. Another violent tremor rolled through the ship. Somewhere above them, metal screamed as another section of the transport collapsed inward. Dust rained from the ceiling while warning sirens blared louder throughout the hangar. Orbital stabilization failure imminent. The automated voice announced overhead. Jax looked upward nervously. How long before this thing falls out of the sky? Kron shrugged. Minutes maybe. Great. TK barely heard them. His attention remained locked on the datapad in his hand. Memory reconstruction. The words refused to leave his thoughts. He remembered battles, deployments, training. But now every memory felt unstable somehow, like cracks spreading beneath a surface he had always trusted completely. What else had they changed? What else had been taken? A distant metallic impact suddenly echoed through the hangar entrance. Everyone looked up immediately. Heavy footsteps. Multiple. Moving in formation. Vast's posture changed instantly. Positions. The command snapped through the room with practiced authority. Black Echo training took over automatically. TK moved without hesitation, sliding behind an overturned cargo loader near the center of the hangar, while Kron limped toward a damaged fuel container for cover. Lyra and Jax moved together behind the wreckage of a TIE fighter. The footsteps grew louder. Steady. Precise. Not the chaotic movement of boarding parties or scavengers. Professional soldiers. Then the first figure appeared through the smoke. Black armor. Not stormtrooper white. The trooper stepped into the hangar carrying a long rifle across his chest, while red targeting sensors glowed faintly from beneath a polished black helmet. Two more soldiers emerged behind him immediately, identical armor reflecting the flickering emergency lights. Imperial Special Operations. Even TK felt uneasy looking at them. Something about the armor felt wrong. Too clean, too perfect, like machines pretending to be human. The lead operative scanned the hangar slowly before speaking through an external vocoder. Black Echo Squad. The distorted voice echoed across the chamber. You are ordered to surrender immediately. No one moved. The operative tilted his head slightly. Non-compliance will result in termination. Jax leaned toward Lyra slightly. These guys always talk like that, usually right before shooting people. Vask slowly stepped out from behind cover. His rifle remained lowered. TK looked toward him immediately. Sergeant. Easy. Vask interrupted quietly. The old clone stared directly at the black-armored operatives. You received direct authorization from High Command? He asked. Yes. Under whose command? A brief pause followed. Then, Commander Vorlin. Vask's expression darkened slightly. That was all the confirmation he needed. The lead operative raised one hand slowly. Behind him, the remaining soldiers leveled their rifles toward the hangar. Final warning, the operative announced. Surrender immediately. TK looked toward Vask. The old clone remained perfectly still for one long moment. Then he sighed softly. Yeah, Vask muttered. That sounds like the Empire. His rifle snapped upward instantly. The first shot hit the lead operative directly in the throat. Chaos exploded across the hangar. Blaster fire lit the darkness in violent flashes of red and blue as everyone opened fire simultaneously. TK leaned out from cover and fired twice toward the advancing operatives while Jax unloaded a rapid burst from the opposite side of the room. The black-armored soldiers moved fast. Too fast. One operative dove behind a fuel container while another advanced directly through incoming fire without hesitation, firing precise, controlled bursts toward Kron's position. Sparks exploded from the cargo crate beside TK's head. Move! Vask shouted. TK rolled sideways as blaster fire shredded the loader he had been hiding behind seconds earlier. The operative advancing through the center of the hangar turned toward him immediately. Red targeting sensors locked onto TK's chest. The black-armored soldier fired. TK barely managed to throw himself behind another piece of wreckage before the shot tore through the floor beside him. Professional. Efficient. Relentless. These were not normal Imperial troops. Across the hangar, Lyra fired 3 controlled shots toward the nearest operative before ducking back into cover. "They're trying to pin us down." "No," Vask yelled back. The old clone fired again toward the hangar entrance. "They're trying to contain us." TK understood instantly. Recovery teams didn't care about surviving, only completion of objective. And their objective was Black Echo Squad, dead or alive. Chapter 7. Firefight. The hangar became a war zone. Blaster fire ripped through the darkness in violent flashes of red and blue, illuminating smoke-filled air and shattered wreckage in brief bursts of light. Every shot echoed brutally against the steel walls of the Judicator, amplified by the enclosed chamber until the entire transport seemed to shake with the sound of combat. TK slid behind the wreckage of a destroyed TIE fighter as another volley slammed into the metal above his head. The black-armored operatives kept advancing. Calm, methodical, they moved through incoming fire like machines executing a calculation rather than soldiers fighting a battle. One operative crossed open ground without hesitation, while another provided suppressive fire from the hangar entrance, forcing Lyra and Jax deeper behind cover. "They're flanking left," Jax shouted. TK leaned around the wreckage and fired twice toward the advancing operative. The shot struck center mass, but the black-armored soldier barely staggered before continuing forward. "Armor's reinforced," TK yelled. "Fantastic!" Jax snapped back. Across the hangar, Vask fired another precise burst that struck one operative directly through the visor. The black-armored trooper collapsed instantly. The remaining soldiers did not react. No hesitation, no acknowledgement. They simply adjusted formation and continued advancing. Kron swore loudly from behind a fuel container as blaster bolts tore chunks from the metal around him. "I officially hate these people." "You hate everyone," Lyra shouted back. "Yeah, but this feels personal." Another explosion rocked the hangar violently. One of the damaged support beams near the ceiling finally gave way, crashing down across the far side of the deck in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Flames erupted immediately from a ruptured fuel line, spreading across the floor toward the wrecked starfighters. The Judicator was dying faster now. TK risked another glance over cover. The operatives were separating. 2 pushed toward the left flank, while the third advanced directly through the center of the hangar, carrying a larger rifle than the others. Heavy weapon. TK recognized the model instantly. An SX-21 repeating blaster. "Down," he shouted. The heavy trooper opened fire a second later. The repeating blaster roared violently, unleashing a stream of red plasma across the hangar. Cargo containers exploded apart under the barrage, while sparks and molten metal sprayed through the chamber. Jax barely avoided getting hit as the barrage shredded the wreckage beside him. "Okay," the pilot yelled. "Now, I really hate these guys." TK fired toward the heavy trooper, but the operative remained protected behind reinforced armor plating while continuing to suppress the entire hangar. They were being boxed in. Vask realized it too. "Move toward the maintenance tunnel," the clone shouted. "There's no exit down there." Kron replied. "There is now." Kron blinked once. Then understanding crossed his face. "Oh," he muttered. "That's a terrible idea." The engineer immediately began fumbling through equipment pouches along his belt. TK fired another controlled burst toward the advancing flank operatives before moving quickly toward Lyra's position. "Can you cover Kron?" Lyra reloaded smoothly. "Depends. Is he about to blow something up?" "Yes." "Then absolutely." The rebel scout rose from cover and fired 3 quick shots toward the left flank, forcing one operative backward behind a support pillar. Jax joined her immediately, laying down enough suppressive fire for Kron to limp toward the maintenance tunnel entrance near the rear wall. The engineer reached the sealed hatch and dropped heavily beside the control panel. "Hurry up," Jax shouted. "I'm working on it." Blaster fire exploded across the wall beside him. Kron ducked instinctively as sparks burst from the control panel overhead. The heavy trooper continued advancing through the center of the hangar, repeating blaster roaring without pause. The black-armored operative moved with terrifying confidence beneath the flickering emergency lights, almost robotic in the precision of his movements. TK fired again. This time the shot struck a weak point near the trooper's shoulder joint. The operative staggered slightly. Not much, but enough. Vask appeared from the smoke instantly. The old clone moved faster than TK had ever seen him move before. 3 precise shots cracked through the hangar in rapid succession. One struck the heavy trooper's weapon. The second hit the damaged shoulder joint. The third punched directly through the visor. The operative collapsed hard against the deck. For the first time, the remaining black-armored soldiers hesitated. Only for a second, but Vask saw it. "Push forward," he shouted. Black Echo training took over automatically. TK moved immediately, advancing through the wreckage while firing controlled bursts toward the nearest operative. Lyra and Jax followed close behind, forcing the remaining soldiers backward toward the entrance corridor. Kron finally slammed one hand against the maintenance controls. Got it. The hatch exploded outward with a shower of sparks. A narrow tunnel stretched beyond it into darkness. "Moo!" Kron yelled. Another violent tremor rolled through the ship. This one nearly knocked everyone off their feet. Overhead, warning sirens shifted tone abruptly. Critical orbital decay detected. The automated voice sounded almost frantic now. Collision with planetary atmosphere imminent. Jax looked upward. "That sounds bad." "That's because it is," Kron answered. The remaining operatives suddenly fell back toward the corridor entrance. Retreating. Not routed. Organized. One paused long enough to activate a small device attached to the wall beside the doorway. Vask saw it instantly. Explosive. The operative disappeared into the corridor just as the charge detonated. The blast tore through the entrance in a wall of fire and collapsing metal. The entire hangar shook violently as debris crashed across the deck, sealing the corridor completely. Smoke rolled through the chamber. Silence followed. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Jax coughed heavily. "Please tell me they're dead." Vask stared toward the collapsed entrance. "No," he said quietly. TK looked toward the maintenance tunnel behind them. Darkness stretched endlessly beyond the shattered hatch, the only remaining path forward. And somewhere deeper inside the dying Judicator, the truth about Black Echo Squad was waiting. Chapter 8. Descent. The maintenance tunnel smelled like rust, smoke, and stagnant water. TK moved at the front of the group beside Vask, rifle raised toward the darkness ahead while the narrow tunnel groaned around them with every tremor running through the dying Judicator. Dim emergency strips along the walls flickered weakly, casting uneven red light across exposed pipes and dripping condensation. Behind them, Kron sealed the maintenance hatch manually. Not that it would matter much. If the recovery team survived the explosion, and everyone knew they would eventually find another way through. "They'll keep coming," Jax muttered as the hatch locked shut behind them. "Correct," Vask answered without turning around. Jax frowned. "You say that way too calmly." The old clone kept walking. "Panic wastes oxygen." "Pretty sure crashing into a planet wastes oxygen too." Kron snorted quietly somewhere behind them. "He's got a point." Another violent shudder rolled through the transport. The tunnel lights dimmed for half a second before stabilizing again. Dust drifted from the ceiling overhead while distant explosions echoed faintly through the ship below them. The Judicator was entering atmosphere. TK could feel it now. Gravity had shifted slightly, subtle at first, but growing stronger with every passing minute. Loose debris no longer drifted weightlessly through the corridors. Smoke curled downward instead of hanging suspended in the air. They were falling. No one said aloud. They didn't need to. The tunnel sloped downward sharply ahead, leading deeper into the lower engineering sectors beneath the hangar decks. Most of the ship's crew avoided these sections during normal operations. Too hot, too cramped, too easy to get lost inside the endless network of maintenance shafts and reactor conduits, which made it perfect for disappearing, at least temporarily. TK stepped carefully over a broken service droid lying half-submerged in standing water. Its head was missing, The blaster scoring across the wall beside it looked fresh. Vask noticed immediately. Weapons up. Everyone obeyed without question. The atmosphere inside the tunnel changed instantly. Even Jax stopped talking. TK tightened his grip on the rifle as they continued forward through the narrow corridor. Every distant creak of the ship now sounded dangerous. Every shadow stretching beyond the emergency lights felt alive somehow. Then Lyra stopped suddenly. "What is that?" Everyone looked ahead. The tunnel opened into a larger maintenance chamber, roughly 20 meters away. Emergency lights flickered weakly across rows of damaged machinery and hanging cables. Bodies covered the floor. Stormtroopers, engineers, crewmen, at least 15 of them, all dead. Jax swore quietly under his breath. TK moved into the chamber cautiously. The bodies told the story immediately. Execution. Every single one. Precise blaster wounds to the head or chest. No defensive positioning. No return fire. Most of them had been lined against the wall before being shot. Kron stared silently at the scene for several seconds before speaking. Recovery team. Vask nodded once. They're clearing witnesses. Lyra crouched beside one of the dead engineers. The body still clutched a datapad tightly against its chest. "What exactly was this project?" she asked quietly. No one answered, because none of them fully knew. TK's attention drifted toward the far side of the chamber. A blast door stood partially open there, revealing another dark corridor beyond. One word had been painted across the wall beside it in yellow Imperial lettering. Archive. Kron noticed it too. "Well," the engineer muttered, "that's probably important." Jax looked immediately annoyed. Why does every terrible thing aboard this ship seem to be hidden behind doors labeled like that? Imperials enjoy dramatic naming conventions, Lyra answered dryly. TK stepped toward the archive doorway slowly. Something about the word unsettled him. Another fragment of memory flickered briefly through his thoughts. Cold white rooms, medical tables, voices speaking through glass, subject responding positively to reconstruction. Then pain, unbearable pain. TK stopped walking immediately. His breathing had quickened beneath the helmet. Vask noticed. "TK, I'm fine." The answer came too fast. The old clone studied him silently for a moment, but said nothing further. Kron moved past them toward the partially open blast door. "Only one way to find out what's inside." Jax sighed heavily. "I hate that sentence." The engineer forced the door open fully with a loud metallic groan. Darkness waited beyond. Rows of data terminals stretched through the archive chamber beneath flickering emergency lights. Massive server columns lined both sides of the room, many still operational despite the damage spreading throughout the ship. And in the center of the chamber, someone was still alive. The Imperial officer looked up slowly from the terminal as the group entered. Blood covered the front of his gray uniform. A blaster wound burned through one shoulder. But the officer still held a pistol weakly in one shaking hand. TK recognized the insignia immediately. Imperial intelligence. The officer's exhausted eyes moved across the group before settling on the armor markings painted across TK and Vask. "Black Echo," he whispered. Vask raised his rifle slightly. "Name?" The officer gave a weak smile. "Lieutenant Solon." His breathing sounded shallow now. Labored. Like every word hurt. Jax glanced toward the pistol. "You gonna shoot us or die dramatically first?" Lyra elbowed him immediately. Solon ignored the comment completely. Instead, he looked directly at TK. "They're coming for you." TK frowned. "Who?" The officer laughed weakly. "Not who," he whispered. "What?" A low metallic sound suddenly echoed somewhere deep within the archive chamber. Heavy, mechanical, moving slowly through the darkness beyond the server rows. Everyone raised their weapons instantly. Solon's expression changed immediately. Fear. Real fear. "They found me," he whispered. Then the lights in the archive chamber went out completely. Chapter 9. The Archive. Darkness swallowed the archive chamber instantly. For one brief moment, the only sound inside the room was the distant groaning of the adjudicator as the crippled transport continued tearing itself apart around them. Somewhere deep below the ship, metal screamed beneath atmospheric pressure while loose debris rattled violently through the ventilation shafts overhead. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, mechanical, slow. Each one echoed through the darkness beyond the server rows with deliberate precision. TK-346 raised his rifle immediately, eyes straining beneath the dim emergency glow now barely flickering along the floor panels. Beside him, Vask stepped forward slightly, placing himself between the sound and the rest of the group without hesitation. The old clone's rifle never wavered. Lieutenant Solon looked terrified. Not nervous, not frightened, terrified. "They sent it," he whispered. Jax frowned in the darkness. "Sent what?" The officer didn't answer. Another metallic footstep echoed through the archive. Closer now. Kron slowly backed toward one of the server columns. "I officially miss normal stormtroopers." Lyra moved beside TK carefully, keeping her weapon trained toward the darkness between the rows of terminals. "You know what this is?" she asked quietly. TK shook his head once, but part of him already did. Not consciously, instinctively. Somewhere buried beneath fractured memory and conditioned thought, recognition scratched at the edge of his mind. The emergency lights flickered again, and something moved between the server rows. Tall, black, too fast to fully see. Jax immediately fired. The blaster bolt vanished into darkness. Then something slammed into him from the side. Jax crashed hard against one of the terminal stations as the massive figure emerged fully into view. Imperial armor, but not stormtrooper armor. This was heavier, broader. Black plating stretched across an enormous mechanical frame, while red optical sensors glowed beneath a smooth, expressionless helmet. Thick cables ran beneath exposed sections of armor near the neck and shoulders, pulsing faintly with blue electrical light. The machine pinned Jax against the terminal effortlessly. One armored hand wrapped around the pilot's throat and lifted him completely off the floor. "Target identified," the thing said mechanically. Its voice did not sound human. "Black Echo assets located." TK fired instantly. The blaster bolt struck the machine directly in the chest. It did nothing. The figure turned its head toward him slowly, then released Jax hard enough to throw him across the archive chamber. Vask opened fire immediately. This time machine reacted. It moved sideways with terrifying speed as blaster fire tore through the server racks behind it. Metal exploded apart in showers of sparks while the machine crossed half the room almost instantly. Too fast. Far too fast. Kron swore loudly. "That's not a recovery team." "No," Solon whispered weakly from the floor near the terminal. "It's the prototype." The machine lunged directly toward Vask. The old clone barely blocked the strike with the stock of his rifle before the impact hurled him backward into one of the server columns hard enough to dent the metal casing. TK moved without thinking. Years of combat instinct took over completely. He charged forward and slammed into the machine from the side, just as it raised one arm toward Vask again. The impact staggered the mechanical soldier only slightly, but enough to interrupt the attack. The machine turned immediately toward TK. Its glowing red optics locked onto him. Then it tilted its head slightly. "Recognition. Subject TK-346, it said. The mechanical voice sounded almost calm now. Compliance degradation detected. A cold feeling spread through TK's chest. The machine knew him. Before he could react, the prototype struck him hard across the torso. Pain exploded through his ribs as he crashed violently across the archive floor, sliding through shattered glass and broken circuitry before slamming into a terminal console. The world blurred briefly. Warning lights flashed inside his helmet. Armor damage. Breathing difficulty. Somewhere nearby, Lyra shouted his name. Then blaster fire erupted again. Lyra and Jax fired together from opposite sides of the room, forcing the machine backward through the archive chamber, while Kron scrambled toward the central server controls. "It's armored too heavily," Jax yelled. "There's always a weak point." Kron shouted back. The machine advanced again through incoming fire without hesitation. Its movements felt wrong. Not like a droid. Not fully human either. Perfectly controlled. Perfectly efficient. Solon dragged himself weakly across the floor toward TK. "You need to destroy the neural core," he gasped. TK forced himself upright painfully. "Where?" The spine. Another impact shook the archive violently. This time part of the ceiling collapsed near the entrance, sending smoke and debris crashing into the room. Emergency lights flickered wildly overhead while warning sirens screamed throughout the ship. Atmospheric entry critical. The automated voice sounded distorted now. Structural collapse imminent. The judicator was beginning to burn apart during descent, and still the machine kept advancing. Vask fired again toward its back, finally striking exposed wiring beneath the shoulder armor. Sparks erupted outward as the machine staggered slightly. "There!" TK shouted. The prototype turned instantly toward Vask, then charged. Fast. Too fast. The old clone barely managed to fire one more shot before the machine slammed into him with enough force to drive both of them through a terminal station in an explosion of sparks and shattered metal. "Vask!" TK shouted. The machine pinned the clone against the wreckage immediately, one armored hand crushing around Vask's throat. "Non-compliant asset," it said coldly. Then the machine began tightening its grip, and for the first time since waking aboard the Judicator, TK-346 felt genuine fear. Chapter 10. Non-compliant. Vask's boots scraped violently against the archive floor as the machine lifted him higher against the wreckage. The old clone fought silently. Even now, one hand gripped the machine's wrist, trying to force the crushing pressure away from his throat, while the other struggled to bring his blaster back toward the prototype's exposed side. Sparks showered around them from the ruined terminal station as warning sirens screamed throughout the collapsing archive chamber. The machine tightened its grip further. "Non-compliant asset," it repeated coldly. Vask's blaster slipped from his hand and clattered across the floor. TK-346 moved instantly. Pain shot through his ribs the moment he forced himself upright, but adrenaline drowned most of it beneath raw instinct. He sprinted across the archive chamber through drifting smoke and shattered glass, while Lyra and Jax unleashed another barrage of covering fire toward the prototype. The machine ignored them completely. Its focus remained locked on Vask. TK reached the fallen blaster beside the wreckage and fired directly into the exposed wiring beneath the machine's shoulder plating. The shot struck cleanly. Sparks exploded outward. For the first time, the prototype reacted violently. Its grip loosened just enough for Vask to wrench himself free before collapsing heavily onto the floor beside the destroyed terminal. The machine turned toward TK immediately. Red optical sensors burned through the smoke like targeting lasers. Then it charged. TK barely dove aside in time as the machine crashed through the wreckage behind him with enough force to tear metal apart. The impact shook the archive chamber violently. Not human. Nothing about the thing moved like a person. Every motion felt calculated to maximum efficiency, stripped completely of hesitation or emotion. It fought the way Imperial propaganda always described perfect soldiers. Relentless, obedient, disposable. Exactly what Project Harbinger had been trying to create. Jax fired another burst from across the room. "How do we kill this thing?" "The spine," Solon shouted weakly from the floor. "The neural cores in the spine." Kron looked up from the server terminal he had been frantically dismantling. "That's incredibly useful information to mention earlier." The machine lunged toward TK again. This time TK met it head-on. He grabbed the prototype's armored arm and redirected the strike just enough for the machine's momentum to carry it partially past him before slamming the rifle stock hard against the exposed shoulder joint Vask had already damaged. The impact cracked the plating further. Blue electrical light pulsed beneath it. Weak point. The machine reacted instantly, driving one armored elbow into TK's chest hard enough to send him crashing backward across the archive floor again. His vision blurred from the impact. Armor warning indicators flashed red inside the damaged helmet. Across the room, Lyra moved quickly toward Vask while the old clone struggled back to his feet. "You alive?" she asked. Vask coughed once, then nodded. Unfortunately, even now, the clone still sounded calm. The machine advanced toward TK again. Slowly this time, almost deliberately. "Subject TK-346, it said mechanically. "Return to compliance." The words hit harder than they should have. Something flickered violently through TK's thoughts. White medical lights. Voices behind glass. Pain. A cold mechanical tone repeating the same phrase again and again. "Return to compliance. Return to compliance." TK's breathing quickened beneath the helmet. The machine tilted its head slightly. Memory instability detected. Then suddenly, everything came back. Not all of it. Not completely. But enough. Rain pouring across a burning village beneath a black night sky. Black Echo Squad marching through smoke. Civilians lined against a wall. Children crying. TK remembered raising his rifle. Remembered pulling the trigger. Then afterward, medical chambers. Needles. Voices. Subject displays emotional resistance. Proceed with reconstruction. TK staggered backward slightly. The memories felt wrong inside his head. Broken. Forced into place like pieces belonging to someone else. The machine stepped closer. "You were corrected," it said. TK stared at the glowing red optics beneath the black helmet. "No," he whispered. The machine raised its weapon. "You were improved." TK's grip tightened around the rifle. Anger spread through him now. Hotter than fear. Hotter than confusion. For his entire life, the Empire had taught him soldiers existed for one purpose: obedience. Not morality. Not individuality. Not choice. Just obedience. But standing there inside the collapsing archive chamber, surrounded by dead troopers and erased memories and Imperial lies, TK realized something horrifying. The Empire had never seen them as soldiers at all. Only property, assets, weapons, nothing more. The machine fired. TK moved. He rolled beneath the blaster shot and drove himself forward with everything he had left, slamming directly into the prototype's damaged side. Both of them crashed through one of the server columns in an explosion of sparks and collapsing metal. The machine recovered almost instantly. TK didn't give it a chance. He grabbed the exposed wiring near its shoulder and ripped the damaged plating completely away. Blue electrical arcs burst outward, and beneath the armor, a spine-like neural core glowed faintly beneath transparent shielding. Human. Partially. The realization sickened him. The prototype struck him hard across the faceplate. Cracks spread across TK's helmet visor instantly. But this time he stayed standing. The machine raised its weapon again, and Vask fired. One perfect shot. The blaster bolt punched directly into the exposed neural core. For 1 second, the machine froze completely. Then blue light exploded outward from the shattered spine. The prototype convulsed violently as sparks erupted from every seam in its armor. Its red optical sensors flickered wildly while distorted static burst from its voice emitter. Compliance. The word broke apart into electronic distortion. Then the machine collapsed heavily onto the archive floor. Silence filled the chamber. Nobody moved. Smoke drifted slowly through the red emergency lighting while the wreckage of the archive burned around them. Finally, Jax exhaled sharply. "I hate this ship." Kron nodded immediately. "Strongly agree." TK stared down at the destroyed prototype, at the exposed mechanical spine beneath shattered black armor, at the faint traces of human tissue still connected to the machine underneath. And quietly, deep beneath the collapsing rage inside him, fear returned, because the Empire had not been experimenting on soldiers. The Empire had been replacing them. Chapter 11. Atmospheric Entry. The archive chamber shook violently as the Judicator tore into the upper atmosphere. Everything changed at once. The distant groaning of the ship became a deafening roar that echoed through the collapsing corridors beneath their feet. Heat spread rapidly through the archive as friction ignited damaged sections of the outer hull. Red emergency lights flickered uncontrollably overhead, while warning sirens merged into one continuous mechanical scream. Atmospheric breach detected. The automated voice crackled through failing speakers. Structural integrity critical. Flames suddenly burst through a rupture near the far wall. Jax immediately backed away from it. Okay, that seems bad. That's because we're falling out of the sky. Kron snapped while frantically pulling cables from the damaged server core, which, for the record, is extremely bad. TK-346 barely heard them. His eyes remained fixed on the destroyed prototype, lying motionless across the archive floor. Exposed wiring sparked faintly beneath the shattered armor plating, while traces of smoke curled upward from the ruined neural core embedded along its spine. Human tissue, mechanical systems. One thing fused into another. Project Harbinger. The Empire hadn't just wanted obedient soldiers. They wanted soldiers incapable of becoming anything else. TK. Vast's voice finally pulled him back. The old clone stood near the archive entrance, one gloved hand pressed against the bruising around his throat where the prototype had nearly crushed it. Despite the injuries, his posture remained steady, focused, controlled, the same way it always had been. We move now, Vask said. TK nodded once and forced himself away from the wreckage. The archive chamber was dying around them. Server columns sparked violently as systems overloaded one after another. Pieces of the ceiling had already begun collapsing inward under atmospheric stress, sending debris crashing across the floor. Kron finally disconnected the last cable from the central terminal and shoved a datapad into his satchel. Please tell me that's important, Jax said. Oh, it's definitely important, Kron answered. Which means the Empire absolutely does not want anyone reading it. Lyra looked toward him sharply. You copied the files? Of course I copied the files. While we were being hunted by nightmare cyborg stormtroopers. Kron frowned. A multitask. Another violent impact nearly knocked everyone off balance. This time the floor itself tilted sharply beneath them. The Judicator was breaking apart during descent. Vask looked toward the maintenance corridor outside the archive. Escape pods. Jax blinked. There are still escape pods? There were. That doesn't answer the question. Vask ignored him and started toward the corridor. The group moved quickly through the collapsing lower decks while the transport screamed around them under atmosphere pressure. Smoke filled the corridors now, thick enough to sting through damaged helmet filters. Heat spread through the ship rapidly as fires erupted behind wall panels and ruptured fuel lines. Every few seconds, another section of the Judicator failed somewhere nearby. Metal twisted. Bulkheads collapsed. Entire corridors depressurized instantly. It felt less like moving through a ship and more like running through the corpse of something enormous while it burned alive around them. TK stayed near the rear beside Lyra as they pushed through the maintenance sectors. You all right? She asked quietly. He almost answered automatically. Yes. Fine. Standard responses drilled into every Imperial trooper since training. But the words stopped before leaving his mouth. No, he admitted. Lyra glanced toward him briefly. The confession surprised both of them. TK stared ahead into the smoke-filled corridor. I don't know what's real anymore. The words felt heavier than the rifle in his hands. Lyra was quiet for a moment before speaking. That's how they keep control. TK looked toward her. The Empire, she continued. They convince people the only thing that matters is obedience. Once you believe that long enough, she glanced toward the black armor markings on his shoulder plate. You stop asking who benefits from it. Ahead of them, Jax suddenly stopped moving. Everyone looked up. The corridor ahead had collapsed completely, or almost completely. A narrow opening remained beneath twisted support beams and sparking cables, barely large enough to crawl through. Beyond it, open sky. Orange fire stretched across the atmosphere outside the shattered hull, while pieces of the Judicator burned apart around them during descent. Massive chunks of debris tore away from the transport in long trails of flame. And far below, an ocean. Dark green waves stretched endlessly beneath violent storm systems. Kron stared through the breach. I would just like everyone to know that I hate every single part of this situation. Vask moved toward the opening immediately. Escape Bay's 2 corridors beyond this section. Jax looked at the collapsing ceiling overhead. And if the ship breaks apart first? Vask glanced back calmly. Then we die. Jax stared at him. You clones are unbelievably comforting. Suddenly, blaster fire erupted behind them. Everyone turned instantly. Black armored operatives emerged through the smoke at the far end of the corridor. Recovery team. They had found them again. One operative raised a rifle immediately. Targets acquired. Vask swore under his breath. Move! Blaster fire exploded through the corridor as the recovery team advanced through the smoke. TK fired back instantly, while Lyra dragged Kron toward the narrow breach beneath the collapsed support beams. Sparks erupted around them as plasma bolts slammed into the walls, rupturing pipes and sending steam flooding into the corridor. The ship shook violently again. This time something enormous tore free somewhere above them. A deafening metallic scream echoed through the hull. Then the floor beneath their feet began to split apart. Chapter 12. Break apart. The floor split down the center of the corridor with a violent metallic scream. TK-346 barely managed to grab the edge of a ruptured support beam before the deck beneath him collapsed entirely into open air. A wave of heat and smoke surged upward through the widening fracture as pieces of the Judicator tore away during atmospheric descent. Someone shouted his name. Then gravity shifted again. The corridor lurched sideways violently as the transport entered an uncontrolled spin. TK slammed hard against the wall, fingers tightening instinctively around the support beam, while debris and loose equipment hurtled past him toward the burning breach, now opening beneath the ship. Across the collapsing corridor, Jax lost his footing completely. The pilot slid toward the widening fracture in the floor, desperately clawing for anything stable as sparks and torn metal disappeared into the atmosphere below. Jax! Lyra lunged instantly. Her hand caught his wrist seconds before he vanished through the breach. The corridor groaned around them like it was moments away from ripping apart entirely. TK forced himself upright despite the pain tearing through his ribs. Recovery team blaster fire still streaked through the smoke-filled corridor from behind them, while the black-armored operatives advanced steadily through the chaos. Even now, even while the ship died around them, the recovery team never hesitated. Move! Vash shouted. The old clone fired another controlled burst down the corridor, forcing the nearest operative back behind cover long enough for Kron to crawl beneath the collapsed support beams toward the next section. Jax struggled desperately against Lyra's grip. Hurry up, he yelled. I'm actively falling. You're welcome. Lyra snapped back. TK dropped beside them immediately and grabbed Jax's other arm. Together, they pulled the pilot back on his stable deck, plating just as another section of the corridor collapsed into open sky behind him. Jax rolled onto his back, breathing heavily. Okay, he gasped. That was bad. Kron's voice echoed faintly from ahead. That's becoming a theme. The Judicator shuddered violently again. A massive explosion thundered somewhere deep inside the ship, followed immediately by a deafening chain reaction racing through the lower decks beneath them. Vask looked upward sharply. Reactor breach. TK felt the fear in those words immediately. The clone turned toward them. Run! No one argued. They pushed forward through the collapsing corridor while the ship broke apart around them piece by piece. Warning sirens screamed overhead before finally dying entirely as emergency systems failed one after another. Now there was only fire, smoke, and the terrible sound of metal tearing itself apart during descent. The next corridor beyond the breach looked even worse. Half the ceiling had collapsed inward, crushing several maintenance stations beneath twisted support beams. Burning fuel spilled across the walls in rivers of orange flame, while sections of exposed hull glowed faintly red from atmospheric friction. And still the recovery team followed. TK glanced backward just long enough to see the black-armored operatives emerging through the smoke again. Unstoppable. Like the prototype in the archive. Like the Empire itself. They don't stop, Jax muttered while firing another burst behind them. No, Vask answered coldly. They don't. Ahead, the corridor finally opened into a larger chamber. Escape Bay 3, or what remained of it. The chamber had been devastated during the crash. Half the escape pods were gone entirely, either launched during impact or destroyed afterward. Emergency lights flickered weakly across twisted launch rails and burning control panels, while smoke drifted heavily through the air. But one pod remained intact. Kron pointed immediately. There! Everyone moved toward it instantly, then stopped. The pod only held 4 seats. Silence fell across the chamber. Jax looked at the pod, then at the group. Oh no! Lyra checked the controls quickly. Life support's functional. Navigation, 2. How many seats? Vask asked. She hesitated. Then quietly. 4. No one spoke. TK looked around the chamber slowly. 5 people. 1 pod short. Another explosion rocked the ship violently. This one closer. Much closer. Recovery team blaster fire suddenly erupted from the corridor behind them. The operatives had reached the bay. Vask reacted immediately, taking position behind a collapsed launch rail while firing controlled shots back toward the entrance. Get the pod ready. Lyra moved instantly toward the controls, while Jax joined Vask at the barricade. Kron looked between the pod and the corridor entrance nervously. I really hate where this conversation is probably going. TK stared at the burning corridor beyond the chamber, then at the black-armored operatives slowly advancing through the smoke, then finally toward Vask. The old clone already knew. TK could see it. Vask fired another burst toward the recovery team before speaking calmly, without looking back. TK. The single word carried enough meaning by itself. No, TK answered immediately. Somebody has to hold them here. We can all make it. No, Vask repeated firmly. We can't. The ship groaned violently around them. More cracks spread across the walls. Escape Bay 3 was beginning to tear away from the rest of the transport. Jax looked toward Vask in disbelief. You're seriously staying? The old clone almost smiled. Been doing this a long time, pilot. Lyra stepped closer. Vask, get them out. His voice hardened instantly. That was the squad leader speaking now. Not asking. Ordering. Blaster fire exploded across the barricade again. One shot struck Vask's shoulder armor, sending sparks bursting across the chamber, but the old clone barely reacted as he returned fire calmly into the advancing smoke. TK stared at him, at the scarred armor, at the cracked helmet, at the man who had trained Black Echo Squad through years of war and occupation and endless Imperial campaigns. Then suddenly another memory surfaced. Vask standing beside him during training years ago. Listen carefully, the clone had said while watching younger troopers run combat drills. The Empire teaches soldiers how to follow orders. But surviving war, he glanced toward TK. That part you learned from the men beside you. The memory vanished. TK realized suddenly. Vask had known, long before the rest of them, about the Empire, about what it was becoming, and somehow he had stayed anyway. Not for the Empire, for the squad. Another explosion rocked the bay. The recovery team was getting closer. Vask reloaded smoothly behind the barricade, then looked toward TK one final time. Get your people out of here. Chapter 13. Surface. The Judicator broke apart above the ocean. TK-346 fell to happen. One moment the escape pod was still connected to the burning remains of the transport, shaking violently as atmosphere tore through the dying ship around them. The next, everything behind them exploded. The shockwave slammed into the pod hard enough to throw everyone sideways against their restraints as warning alarms screamed throughout the small compartment. Outside the narrow viewport, pieces of the Judicator spun downward through clouds of fire and smoke like fragments of a falling city. Kron shouted something from the pilot controls, but the sound disappeared beneath the roar of atmospheric entry. The pod dropped violently. Clouds swallowed them instantly. Rain hammered against the hull with deafening force, while turbulence shook the compartment hard enough to make the entire frame groan. Lightning flashed across the viewport in brief, violent bursts of white, illuminating endless storm clouds surrounding them on all sides. TK sat strapped against the rear wall of the pod, barely hearing anything beyond the pounding in his own head. Vask. The last image remained burned into his thoughts. The old clone standing behind the barricade inside Escape Bay 3, while blaster fire filled the chamber around him. Get your people out of here. Not the people. Your people. The words hurt more now somehow. Another violent tremor ripped through the pod. Kron fought the controls desperately. Okay, tiny update. We are not flying anymore. Jax gripped the side of his seat tightly. You say that like we were flying before. We were falling with structure. That's somehow worse. Lightning exploded outside again. For a brief moment, TK saw the ocean below through the storm clouds. Massive black waves crashed violently beneath them, while pieces of burning debris from the Judicator slammed into the water all across the horizon. Then the pod spun again. Warning alarms blared louder. Stabilizers offline, the automated system announced. Kron stared at the controls in disbelief. Well, that feels important. Lyra tightened the straps across her shoulders and looked toward TK. You still with us? TK nodded once automatically. But the truth was he barely felt present anymore. Everything inside his head felt fractured. The Empire, Black Echo Squad, the prototype, memory reconstruction. It all circled endlessly through his thoughts while the escape pod screamed through the atmosphere around them. Then another memory surfaced. Vask during training years ago. The old clone standing beside a firing range while younger troopers ran combat drills. You know what the difference is between surviving and dying? Vask had asked. Nobody answered. The clone pointed toward the targets downrange. Most soldiers think war is about killing. He shook his head once. War is about enduring. The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared. TK stared silently at the rain hammering against the viewport. Enduring. That was all any of them had done. Another violent impact shook the pod. This time something ruptured near the rear compartment in a shower of sparks. Smoke immediately flooded the interior. Oh, fantastic, Kron muttered. Jax looked back. Please tell me that's normal. Nothing about this is normal. The pod suddenly dropped hard. Free fall. Everyone felt it immediately. The storm clouds vanished beneath them as the ocean rushed upward through the viewport at terrifying speed. Kron swore loudly and pulled the controls with both hands. The pod barely responded. We're too heavy. That feels like information we should have had earlier. Jax shouted. TK finally pushed himself forward from the rear compartment. Move. Kron glanced back. You know how to fly this thing? No. Excellent. TK grabbed the damaged control panel beside him and ripped the protective casing away. Sparks burst across the cockpit immediately. Years of Imperial deployment training flooded back automatically. Emergency descent systems. Manual stabilization overrides. Old clone-era mechanics. The Empire trained stormtroopers to survive crashes because transport losses happened constantly during Outer Rim operations. TK reached deeper into the exposed wiring and manually rerouted power toward the stabilizers. The pod lurched violently sideways, then partially stabilized. Kron blinked. That actually worked. Don't sound surprised. I'm always surprised. The ocean rushed closer beneath them. Far too close. Kron re-engaged the controls immediately while TK held the exposed wiring together manually through bursts of painful electrical heat against his gloves. Rain slammed against the hull. Lightning split the sky around them. The pod descended toward an endless black ocean broken only by jagged cliffs and dense jungle stretching across scattered islands below. Brace! Kron shouted. The escape pod hit the water like a missile. Impact threw everyone forward violently as the pod skipped once across the surface before crashing directly into a wall of jagged rocks near the shoreline. Metal screamed. The viewport shattered. Freezing seawater flooded instantly into the compartment. Then everything went black. Chapter 14. Shoreline. TK-346 woke, choking on seawater. Pain slammed through his body the moment consciousness returned. He rolled violently onto his side as freezing water poured from his mouth and helmet filter, coughing hard enough to tear fire through his ribs. For several seconds, he couldn't breathe properly. All he could hear was crashing waves and the distant rumble of thunder rolling somewhere above the storm clouds. Then air finally returned. Cold, heavy, real. TK pushed himself upward slowly, one hand sinking into soaked black sand beneath him while ocean waves crashed against the rocks only meters away. Rain hammered the shoreline in dense sheets, turning everything beyond a few dozen feet into blurred darkness. The escape pod had shattered against the cliffs. Half the hull remained wedged between jagged rocks near the waterline, while the rest drifted in burning fragments farther out to sea. Smoke and sparks hissed where seawater flooded the ruined engine compartment. TK forced himself to his feet unsteadily. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His armor looked terrible. Sections of the chest plating had cracked completely during impact, and one shoulder plate hung partially loose where the restraint harness had snapped during the crash. But he was alive. For now. Lightning flashed overhead. The jungle beyond the shoreline illuminated briefly in pale white light. Dense trees stretched endlessly upward from the cliffs, their enormous dark silhouettes swaying violently beneath the storm winds. Mist curled through the undergrowth while distant animal cries echoed faintly somewhere deeper within the forest. Unknown world. Unknown terrain. No communications. No support. TK's training immediately began assessing survival priorities automatically. Secure perimeter. Check survivors. Locate supplies. The familiar structure of military procedure helped steady the chaos inside his head. Lyra. The voice carried weakly through the rain. Jax. TK turned immediately toward the rocks farther down the shoreline. The pilot knelt beside the wreckage of the escape pod, dragging someone free from the flooded compartment. Lyra. TK moved quickly across the wet sand despite the pain tearing through his side. By the time he reached them, Jax had already pulled Lyra clear of the water and onto the shore. She's breathing, Jax said quickly, though panic still edged his voice. Lyra coughed suddenly, seawater spilling from her lungs as she rolled painfully onto one side. Jax exhaled sharply. Okay, good. Lyra looked up weakly through rain-soaked hair. You sound disappointed. Trust me, I'm thrilled. Despite everything, TK almost smiled. Almost. Another figure emerged from the shattered remains of the pod behind them. Kron stumbled onto the shoreline, carrying 2 salvage supply packs over one shoulder. I would just like everyone to know, he announced between exhausted breaths, that I officially quit Imperial transportation forever. Jax stared at him. You packed supplies before we crashed? Near-death experiences build efficiency. Thunder rolled overhead again. For a few moments, no one spoke. The reality of where they were slowly settled across the shoreline. They survived. Barely. But the Judicator was gone now. And Vask. TK forced the thought away immediately. The old clone knew what he was doing. Nobody survived longer inside the Empire than Drell Vask by accident. Still, the silence felt wrong without him. Jax looked out toward the storm-covered ocean where burning debris from the Judicator still fell from the sky in distant streaks of fire. You think anyone else made it? No one answered, because nobody believed it. Kron finally dropped the supply packs onto the sand and activated a small portable scanner for one of the pouches. The screen flickered weakly before stabilizing. Okay, he muttered. Good news and catastrophic news. Jack sighed. Why are there never 2 good news options? The pod beacon survived. That's the good news. Yes. Jax frowned. What's the catastrophic part? Kron looked up slowly. The Empire can track it. Silence returned immediately. TK looked back toward the shattered pod. Of course they could. Imperial escape pods automatically transmitted emergency recovery signals during crashes. Standard procedure for stranded personnel. Normally rescue followed. But after Project Harbinger, TK knew exactly what would arrive instead. Recovery teams. Lyra understood too. How long? Kron checked the scanner. Hard to tell through the storm interference. But once orbit stabilizes, Hours, TK finished quietly. Lightning flashed again across the ocean. The jungle behind them suddenly felt much darker, much larger. Jax looked toward the tree line uneasily. Please tell me there's somewhere else we can go besides the horror forest. Kron adjusted the scanner settings again. There might be. Everyone looked toward him. The engineer frowned at the display. I'm picking up an old Imperial signal. TK immediately stiffened. Military. Maybe. Kron zoomed the scanner in further. Transmission's weak. Old too. How old? Lyra asked. Kron looked up slowly. Clone Wars era. Thunder rolled again overhead. TK stared toward the jungle beyond the shoreline, while rain continued pouring across the black sand around them. Somewhere deep inside the storm-covered wilderness, an old Imperial facility was still transmitting. And suddenly the feeling returned again. The same feeling he'd had aboard the Judicator. Like the Empire had buried something here. Something it never wanted found. Chapter 15. Into the jungle. Morning never truly came to the planet. The storm simply grew lighter. Dark clouds still smothered the sky above the ocean, turning the world gray beneath endless rain and distant thunder. Mist drifted heavily through the jungle, overlooking the shoreline, while violent waves continued crashing against the cliffs below. TK-346 stood near the edge of the tree line, watching the horizon. Nothing moved across the sky. No Imperial ships. Not yet. But they would come. The Empire never abandoned valuable assets, especially not ones carrying stolen Project Harbinger data. Behind him, Kron knelt beside the remains of the escape pod, stripping usable component from the wreckage, while Jax unsuccessfully tried drying out a blaster rifle beneath the shelter of a broken hull panel. This planet sucks, the pilot muttered. You've been here 6 hours, Lyra replied while checking supplies nearby. That's all I needed. Kron glanced up briefly. To be fair, he's adapting faster than expected. Jax looked offended. That wasn't a compliment. Correct. TK ignored the conversation and continued scanning the storm-covered ocean. His thoughts kept drifting back toward the Judicator, toward Vask. Every instinct told him the clone was dead, but another part of him refused to believe it. Sergeant Drell Vask had survived battles that should have killed entire platoons. Occupation campaigns. Insurrections, urban sieges. TK once watched the old clone drag 3 wounded troopers through an artillery strike without slowing down. Men like Vask did not die easily. Still, the silence felt heavier now. A sharp electronic chirp broke through his thoughts. Kron looked down at the portable scanner immediately. That's not good. Everyone turned toward him. The engineer adjusted the display quickly while rain dripped from his grease-covered gloves. Orbital signatures. TK stepped closer. Imperial. Kron nodded once. At least 2 ships entering low orbit. Jax swore quietly. Already. Recovery teams move fast. Lyra stood slowly. Can they track the beacon? They already are. The reality settled over the group immediately. The Empire knew exactly where they crashed, and they would not stop searching until everyone connected to Project Harbinger was either recovered or dead. Kron shut the scanner off and shoved it into his satchel. Good news is the storm's interfering with long-range scans. And the bad news? Jax asked. Kron looked toward the jungle. We should probably start moving before murder robots arrive. No one argued. Within minutes, the group disappeared beneath the dense canopy overlooking the shoreline. The jungle swallowed them almost immediately. Massive trees stretched hundreds of feet overhead, their thick black trunks wrapped in twisting vines and strange pale moss that glowed faintly beneath the shadows. Rainwater dripped constantly through the leaves while the ground beneath their boots shifted between mud, tangled roots, and shallow streams cutting through the undergrowth. Everything felt alive, not peaceful. Watching. TK stayed near the front beside Lyra, while Jax covered the rear with visible irritation. How far to the signal? TK asked quietly. Kron checked the scanner while walking. Couple kilometers, maybe. Hard to tell with interference. Assuming the place even still exists, Jax added. It exists, TK said. Lyra glanced toward him. How do you know? TK hesitated. Because somehow, The jungle felt familiar. Not the planet itself. The feeling. Buried facilities. Storms. Black sites hidden far from public routes. The Empire like places people forgot existed. A sudden sound echoed through the jungle ahead. Everyone stopped instantly. Blasters came up. The sound came again. Branches snapping somewhere beyond the trees. Heavy movement. Slow. Deliberate. Jax lowered his voice immediately. Please tell me this planet doesn't have giant predators. Kron frowned. Statistically speaking, it absolutely does. Something moved through the mist ahead. Large. Too large. TK stepped forward slightly, rifle tightening in his hands as the undergrowth parted slowly beneath the storm winds. Then the creature emerged. Massive gray skin stretched across a heavily armored body nearly the size of a transport speeder. For thick legs crushed vegetation beneath enormous clawed feet, while two glowing yellow eyes studied the group silently through the rain. Nobody moved. The creature stared at them for several long seconds, then slowly continued past the group into the jungle without aggression, disappearing back into the mist almost as silently as it arrived. Jax exhaled shakily. I hate this planet so much. Good survival instincts, Kron muttered. They continued deeper through the jungle. Hours passed beneath endless rain and distant thunder, while the storm-covered wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction. Several times TK noticed old Imperial markers partially buried beneath vines and moss along the path. Old military trail indicators. Clone Wars era. The deeper they traveled, the more signs appeared. Broken sensor towers hidden beneath overgrowth. Collapsed bunkers swallowed by vegetation. Rusting vehicle wreckage half submerged in mud. This world had once been occupied heavily, then abandoned. Lyra noticed the markings too. What happened here? TK stared at the remains of a collapsed gun emplacement beside the trail. The Empire happened. Nobody answered, because everyone understood exactly what he meant. Then finally, through the rain and mist ahead, lights appeared. Faint. Artificial. Kron stopped immediately. That's it. The jungle slowly opened beyond the trees, revealing a massive structure built directly into the side of a black cliff overlooking the ocean. Imperial architecture. Cold, gray metal stretched across enormous blast walls scarred by age and weather, while ancient Republic insignias remained barely visible beneath faded Imperial paint. Most of the facility looked abandoned. Dark. Dead. Except for one section. A single row of dim lights still glowed weakly near the upper levels of the structure. The old transmission signal, still active after all these years. Jax stared at the massive facility uneasily. Tell me we're not going inside that. Lightning flashed across the storm clouds overhead. TK looked toward the dark entrance buried beneath the cliffside, then toward the Empire's ships somewhere beyond the atmosphere, searching for them. We don't have another option. Chapter 16. Black Site, Orek. The facility in trance stood open. That unsettled TK-346 more than if it had been sealed. Massive blast doors were built into the cliffside beneath layers of rain and black stone, each one large enough to allow armored transports through side by side. Rust stained the edges of the metal, while faded Imperial markings stretched across the surface beneath years of weather damage. But the doors had not failed open. They had been left open. Rainwater poured through the entrance in shallow rivers that disappeared into darkness beyond the threshold. Weak emergency lights still flickered somewhere deeper inside the structure, casting faint red illumination across the corridor floor. No movement, no sound, nothing. Jax stared into the darkness uneasily. Every terrible thing that's happened so far started with us walking into a creepy Imperial facility. Kron adjusted the strap of the supply pack across his shoulder. Technically, the terrible things started when the Empire existed. That's fair. Lyra stepped carefully toward the entrance, rifle raised slightly. If this place still has power after 20 years, somebody maintained it. Or something did, Jax muttered. TK ignored them and crouched near the doorway. The mud beneath the rainwater had been disturbed recently. Boot prints. Imperial. Not old. Fresh. His stomach tightened immediately. Recovery teams? Lyra asked quietly behind him. TK studied the tracks for another second. No. How can you tell? He pointed toward the impressions in the mud. Standard stormtrooper armor. Jax frowned. That's somehow less comforting. Kron moved closer, scanner humming softly in his hand, while rain dripped from the edges of his soaked jacket. The signal's definitely coming from inside. Then we go inside, Vask would have said. The thought hit TK unexpectedly hard. For several seconds, he simply stared into the darkness beyond the blast doors while thunder rolled across the cliffs overhead. Then he stood. Stay alert. They entered the facility slowly. The air inside felt colder immediately. The corridor beyond the entrance stretched deep beneath the cliffside, lined with exposed pipes and Republic-era architecture later modified with Imperial additions. Old clone insignias remained barely visible beneath layers of gray paint and corrosion. Black Site Orek. The name appeared faded across one wall farther inside. Kron noticed it too. Well, he muttered, that sounds horrifying. The emergency lighting barely functioned. Most of the overhead fixtures flickered weakly or failed entirely, forcing the group to navigate using portable lights salvaged from the escape pod. Their footsteps echoed through the massive corridors as rainwater dripped steadily from cracks in the ceiling overhead. The deeper they moved into the facility, the stranger it became. Everything had been abandoned quickly. Terminal stations still sat active in some rooms. Supply crates remained stacked along the walls untouched. In one chamber, Old Republic uniforms hung neatly beside stormtrooper armor, as if whoever left expected to return eventually. But nobody ever had. Clone Wars outpost. Lyra asked quietly. TK nodded once. Converted later by the Empire. For what? Nobody answered. Because everyone already suspected the truth. Another corridor opened ahead into a large operations chamber overlooking the ocean through massive reinforced windows built into the cliffside. The room looked frozen in time. Old holographic projectors sat dark near tactical tables while broken Republic banners still hung from the walls beside Imperial insignias added years later. Dust covered everything, except one terminal. The screen still glowed blue. Kron immediately moved toward it. Please tell me you're not touching mysterious Imperial computers again, Jax said. That's literally my job now. The engineer activated the terminal fully. Static flickered across the display before rows of archived files appeared on screen. Access logs Project Harbinger authorized personnel only. Kron froze. Slowly, he looked back toward the group. Oh, he said quietly. This is bad. TK stepped beside him. The files continued scrolling automatically across the screen. Subject transport arrival confirmed Black Echo Squad. Phase 2 evaluation. TK's pulse quickened. Phase 2. What does that mean? Lyra asked. Kron opened another file. Medical diagrams appeared across the screen immediately. Neural implants. Behavioral conditioning charts. Psychological suppression models. Then one final heading appeared. Harbinger Directive Purpose. Elimination of individual identity in combat personnel. Silence filled the operations room. Even Jax stopped making sarcastic comments. TK stared at the screen while cold realization spread slowly through him. This facility wasn't where Project Harbinger had started. This was where it had been perfected. Another file opened automatically. Video logs. Kron hesitated briefly before activating playback. Static filled the screen. Then an Imperial officer appeared seated inside a medical chamber. This is Director Malrek, the recording said calmly. Project Harbinger, Log 47. Behind him, rows of stormtroopers stood motionless inside containment chambers. Not sleeping. Waiting. Traditional soldiers present a flaw, Malrek continued. Individual thought leads to hesitation. Hesitation leads to failure. Project Harbinger seeks to remove the flaw permanently. TK felt sick. The recording continued. Black Echo Squad has demonstrated remarkable psychological resilience following memory reconstruction procedures. Subject TK-346 in particular displays unusually high adaptive retention after cognitive reset cycles. Lyra slowly looked toward him. TK couldn't speak. He barely heard the rest of the recording, because another memory surfaced violently through his mind. Bright medical lights, restraining straps across his arms, a voice speaking beside him. "You're going to forget now." Then pain, screaming pain. TK staggered backward away from the terminal. No! The memory kept coming. Rows of troopers standing motionless in identical chambers. Imperial scientists observing through glass. And Vask shouting at someone through the restraints. "They're soldiers, not machines." The recording suddenly cut to static. Then, a new sound echoed faintly through the facility. Not thunder, not machinery. Footsteps. Multiple. Moving somewhere deeper inside the black site. Jax immediately raised his rifle. "Tell me that's us hearing things." Then came voices. Imperial voices. Close. Very close. And suddenly TK realized the fresh footprints outside had not been old at all. Someone else was already inside black site, Orek. Chapter 17. Hunters. Nobody moved. The voices echoed faintly through the corridors beyond the operations chamber, distorted by distance and old ventilation shafts, but unmistakably Imperial. Boots struck metal somewhere deeper inside the black site in slow, coordinated patterns. A search formation. TK-346 killed his flashlight instantly. The room dropped into near-total darkness except for the dim blue glow of the terminal screen beside Kron. Rain battered the cliffside windows overlooking the ocean while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the facility walls. "Lights off," TK whispered. Everyone obeyed immediately. Jax crouched beside one of the old tactical stations, rifle aimed toward the corridor entrance. "Please tell me they haven't found us already." "They found the beacon," Lyra answered quietly. "This was always where they'd look first." Kron shut down the terminal screen. "Which means we should absolutely not still be standing here." The voices grew closer. TK moved toward the doorway and pressed himself carefully against the wall beside it, listening. "Upper levels secure. Negative contact. Continue sweep. Regular stormtroopers. Not recovery teams." That almost made it worse. Recovery operatives killed quickly. Stormtroopers searched. Reported. Contained. Which meant someone important wanted survivors captured alive. TK glanced back toward the darkened terminal. Project Harbinger. Black Site Orek. Memory reconstruction. The Empire had buried this place for a reason. And now they were back. A bright beam of light suddenly swept across the far end of the corridor outside. Stormtroopers entering the sector. TK immediately signaled everyone lower. The first trooper passed the doorway seconds later, white armor reflecting faintly beneath the emergency lights, while two more followed behind carrying portable scanners. "One more level after this," one of them said through helmet comms. "Then command wants the structure sealed." "Think they're actually here?" Recovery teams tracked the pod to this sector. The voices faded slightly as the patrol continued down the corridor. Then another voice crackled over comms. "Lieutenant reports evidence of terminal access in Operations Wing Orek." TK's stomach tightened. Kron mouthed one silent word. "Oops." The patrol stopped instantly. "Say again." "Terminal access confirmed." The stormtroopers turned back toward the operations chamber immediately. TK reacted fast. "Move," he whispered sharply. The group slipped deeper into the operations room, just as flashlight beams swept through the entrance corridor again. "Doors open," one trooper announced outside. "Clear it." TK scanned the room quickly. No exits, no maintenance shafts, nothing except ancient Republic equipment and the massive cliffside windows overlooking the storm below. Jax noticed too. "You have got to be kidding me." The stormtroopers entered the chamber carefully. TK remained hidden behind one of the old server pillars while flashlight beams swept across the dark room. Powers still active. Terminals too. Somebody was here. The nearest trooper stepped toward the central console, then stopped. "What is this place?" Another trooper moved beside him. "Doesn't matter. Search it." Their flashlight beam swept dangerously close to Lyra's position behind the tactical table. TK tightened his grip on the rifle. Too close. Another second, and they would be spotted. Then suddenly, the lights in the facility died completely. Every system shut off at once. The operations chamber vanished into total darkness. What happened? Power failure. No. The sentence cut off abruptly. A sharp metallic impact echoed through the darkness, followed immediately by the sound of a body collapsing hard against the floor. Blaster fire erupted instantly. Red plasma bolts flashed wildly through the chamber, while stormtroopers shouted in confusion. TK dropped low behind cover as blaster shots tore through the darkness overhead. What's shooting at us? I can't see anything. Another trooper screamed suddenly. Then silence. Complete silence. The stormtroopers' flashlight beams flickered weakly back online one by one. The chamber looked different now. One trooper lay dead near the entrance. Another had been dragged several feet across the floor, deep claw marks carved through the white armor across his chest plate. The third stood frozen near the center of the room, rifle shaking slightly beneath his grip. What was that? Then something moved above him. Fast. A dark shape dropped silently from the ceiling support beams. The trooper barely managed to turn before the creature slammed into him violently, knocking both of them against the far wall. TK caught only fragments in the flashing lights. Gray skin, long limbs, black eyes, teeth. The trooper screamed once, then stopped. Blood splattered across the tactical display. The creature disappeared back into the darkness almost instantly. Silence returned again. Nobody breathed. Jack stared into the shadows. Okay, he whispered. Nope. Kron looked horrified. That was not one of the giant jungle things. The remaining flashlight rolled slowly across the floor until its beams settled against the far wall. Claw marks stretched deep through the metal paneling there. Fresh. Lyra slowly looked toward TK. What else did the Empire keep on this planet? Before anyone answered, another sound echoed through the facility. A low distorted transmission crackling through broken speakers overhead. Survivors confirmed. Static swallowed part of the message. Then a second voice responded. Cold. Mechanical. Deploy recovery units. TK felt the blood drain from his face. Recovery teams had arrived. And now something else inside Blacksite, Orek, was hunting too. Chapter 18. The Things Below. The stormtrooper's body twitched once, then went still. Nobody inside the operations chamber moved. Rain hammered against the cliffside windows while broken emergency lights flickered weakly overhead, illuminating the room in uneven pulses of red and white. Blood spread slowly across the floor near the shattered tactical station where the creature had dragged the trooper into darkness. Jax kept his rifle aimed toward the shadows above them. I need everyone to be honest with me right now, he whispered. What in the hell was that? No one answered. TK-346 stepped carefully toward the body nearest the entrance while keeping his weapon raised. The dead stormtrooper's chest armor had been peeled open by something immensely strong. Deep claw marks cut straight through plastoid plating like it had been paper. Animal, but not natural. TK crouched beside the corpse silently. The wounds looked familiar somehow. Not from memory. From training files. Republic Archive footage. Clone Wars biological experiments. The realization settled coldly into his stomach. Kron noticed his expression immediately. You know something? TK stood slowly. During the Clone Wars, the Republic used this planet for weapons research. Jax blinked. You say that like there's a normal amount of weapons research. The Kaminoans engineered biological predators for jungle warfare. TK looked toward the dark corridors beyond the chamber. Adaptive hunting organisms. Kron stared at him. You mean the Republic built monsters? The Empire continued the project. Thunder rolled across the cliffs outside. Lyra looked toward the claw marks carved into the wall, and then abandoned them here. A distant metallic crash echoed somewhere deeper inside the facility. Everyone turned instantly. Another sound followed. Blaster fire. Far below them. The recovery teams had entered the lower levels. Jax frowned slightly. Sounds like they found the wildlife. Won't slow them down long, TK answered. He meant it. Recovery operatives weren't trained like ordinary Imperial troops. Fear didn't stop them. Pain barely slowed them. They would continue clearing the facility until every surviving witness was dead or recovered, including Black Echo Squad. Kron moved toward the operations terminal again cautiously. Then we need to stop standing around waiting for murder creatures and fascists to find us simultaneously. Lyra glanced toward the dark corridor where the stormtroopers disappeared. Can you access the facility layout? Probably. That doesn't sound confident. Nothing today has inspired confidence. Kron activated emergency backup power through the terminal manually. The screen flickered weakly back online while Old Republic schematics slowly loaded across the display. The engineer frowned immediately. Well, he muttered, that's concerning. TK stepped beside him. The schematic revealed the facility stretched far deeper beneath the cliffside than expected. Multiple underground sectors extended below the visible structure, connected through old laboratory wings and containment chambers buried beneath the ocean floor. One section blinked red repeatedly. Sublevel 9. Power active. Why does only one section still have power? Lyra asked quietly. Kron zoomed further into the schematic, then froze. No. Jax looked at him. That's usually my line. Kron slowly looked back toward the group. Harbinger wasn't just tested here. The engineer pointed toward the active sublevel. It started here. Silence filled the chamber. TK stared at the schematic while fragments of memory stirred uneasily through his thoughts again. Cold laboratory walls. Rows of armored troopers standing motionless. A voice saying, Phase 1 subjects failed. Then another. Begin neurological reconstruction. His pulse quickened. This place. He had been here before. Not recently. Years ago. Before Black Echo Squad even existed. The realization hit him hard enough to make him step backward slightly. Lyra noticed immediately. TK, I remember this facility. Everyone went silent. Not because they doubted him. Because they believed him instantly. TK stared at the schematic while more fragmented images surfaced violently behind his eyes. Medical restraints. White lights. A child crying somewhere nearby. Stormtroopers marching through sterile hallways. And Vask shouting at an Imperial officer. They're soldiers. Then another voice answered coldly. Not anymore. The memory vanished. TK inhaled sharply. Kron stared at him carefully. You were here during the early testing. No. TK answered automatically. Then hesitated. Because he no longer trusted his own memories enough to know. Another distant burst of blaster fire echoed upward through the facility. Closer this time. The recovery teams were moving fast. Lyra looked toward the lower-level access corridor visible on the schematic. What's in sublevel 9? Kron checked the file access restrictions. Then quietly answered. Cryogenic storage. Jax frowned. Storage for what? The terminal processed for several seconds before another file unlocked automatically. Project Harbinger Phase 1 subject status. Preserved. Nobody spoke. Then the horrifying realization spread slowly across the room. The prototypes aboard the Judicator weren't the first versions. They were the successful ones. Somewhere beneath Black Site Orek, the failures were still alive. Chapter 19. Sublevel 9. Nobody argued about leaving. The moment Kron finished reading the terminal, the entire atmosphere inside the operations chamber changed. Whatever remained hidden beneath Black Site Orek was no longer just an Imperial secret. It was alive. Rain thundered against the cliffside windows while distant blaster fire echoed faintly through the lower sectors of the facility. Somewhere beneath them, recovery teams continued sweeping through the Black Site room by room. And now something else moved down there too. Something hungry. Kron shut the terminal down immediately. I'm just going to say it. We should absolutely not go to the underground monster level. We need answers, Lyra said. We need survival. The Empire sent recovery teams to this planet for a reason. Yeah, Kron replied. Probably because they also wanted to avoid the underground monster level. Jax looked toward TK. Tell me you agree with the engineer. TK remained silent for several seconds. Sublevel 9. Cryogenic storage. Phase 1 subjects preserved. The words echoed through his thoughts alongside fractured memories he could no longer separate from reality. Then he looked toward the lower access corridor on the schematic. They kept the power running. Kron frowned. Okay, that means whatever's down there still matters to the Empire. Lyra understood immediately. Evidence. TK nodded once. Project Harbinger wasn't some abandoned experiment forgotten after the Clone Wars. The Empire had continued funding it long after the Republic collapsed, which meant somewhere beneath them, proof still existed. Proof of memory reconstruction, neurological conditioning, human experimentation, erased soldiers, enough to expose the Empire completely if it ever reached rebel intelligence. Jack sighed heavily. I hate when the dangerous option becomes the necessary option. That's most options, Kron muttered. Another distant scream echoed upward through the facility. Then blaster fire. Then silence. Everyone froze. The sound had not been human for very long. Kron slowly looked toward the lower access corridor. Good news. There's no possible way you have good news right now, Jack said. The recovery teams found the things first. TK checked his rifle automatically. Ammo low, armor damaged, exhausted, and somehow the mission kept getting worse. Vask would have called that normal. The thought hit harder than expected. TK looked away from the others briefly. 4 years, Sergeant Drell Vask had been the constant in Black Echo Squad. The man who always knew what to do, who always survived, who always carried them through impossible situations by sheer force of discipline and experience. Now, TK kept catching himself waiting for orders that would never come. Lyra's voice pulled him back. You all right? No. The honesty surprised both of them again. TK adjusted the rifle strap across his shoulder. But we keep moving. That sounded like Vask too. The group left the operations chamber moments later. The lower facility corridors felt different immediately. Colder. The deeper they descended beneath the cliffside, the more the architecture changed from Imperial military construction into older Republic research infrastructure. Smooth white walls replaced industrial metal plating, while ancient medical insignias appeared faded beneath years of corrosion and water damage. The storm outside grew distant, replaced instead by the low mechanical hum of still-functioning systems somewhere below. Sublevel 9 still had power, which meant someone, or something, maintained it. Jax walked near the rear of the group now, constantly scanning the shadows around them. You know what I miss? He asked quietly. Kron glanced back. Not being hunted? I was going to say normal rebel missions. Ah yes, the simple days of being shot at by regular stormtroopers. The corridor ahead opened suddenly into a massive elevator chamber, or what used to be one. The central lift shaft stretched downward into darkness, so deep the bottom couldn't be seen. Most of the platform had collapsed years earlier, leaving twisted support beams hanging over the abyss while sparks drifted upward from damaged power conduits below. A narrow maintenance bridge extended across the shaft toward another doorway on the far side. Sublevel 9. TK stepped onto the bridge carefully. The metal groaned beneath his weight. Jax immediately stopped moving. No. Lyra looked back. No. I hate heights. Kron stared at the endless drop beneath them. That's fair, actually. Another sound echoed upward through the shaft. Movement. Metal scraping against metal somewhere below. Everyone froze instantly. The noise came again. Climbing. Fast. TK raised the rifle immediately. Move. The group hurried across the bridge while the sounds below grew louder. Claws. Something was climbing the shaft walls. Jax looked downward once and immediately regretted it. Oh, absolutely not. A shape burst upward through the darkness beneath the bridge. Gray skin, long limbs, black eyes reflecting the emergency lights. The creature slammed into the underside of the maintenance bridge hard enough to shake the entire structure violently. Kron nearly slipped off the edge. Lyra grabbed him instantly. Run! TK shouted. The creature shrieked beneath them. Not an animal sound. Something worse. Like human vocal cords twisted into something unnatural. Then another shriek answered it from deeper below the shaft. Then another. Jax looked horrified. There's more than one. The first creature began climbing over the side of the bridge. TK fired immediately. The blaster bolt tore through its shoulder, sending black blood spraying across the metal walkway. The creature recoiled, but did not fall. Instead, it lunged forward again with terrifying speed. Closer now, TK finally saw its face clearly. Partially human. That was the worst part. Human bone structure still visible beneath stretched gray flesh. Eyes altered surgically. Mechanical implants embedded along the spine and jawline. Harbinger subjects. Failed ones. The Empire hadn't abandoned them. The Empire had left them alive down here. The creature shrieked again and charged directly toward the group across the narrow bridge. Chapter 20. Failed subjects. The creature hit TK-346 hard enough to drive both of them against the side railing of the maintenance bridge. Metal screamed beneath the impact. For one horrifying second, TK felt empty air beneath his boots as the entire structure swayed violently above the endless darkness of the elevator shaft. The creature clawed wildly at his armor with elongated gray fingers tipped in blackened bone-like talons, shrieking directly into his faceplate. Up close, it looked worse. Human features still existed beneath the mutations. A mouth reshaped surgically around sharpened teeth. Mechanical implants running beneath translucent skin along the neck and spine. One eye entirely replaced by a glowing red optical lens. Project Harbinger. Phase 1. The failed subjects. TK slammed the rifle stock across the creature's skull hard enough to crack metal implants beneath the skin. The thing recoiled with another distorted scream, but it still didn't stop attacking. It didn't feel pain normally. That realization terrified him more than the claws. TK, Lyra fired past him. The blaster bolt struck the creature directly through the torso, finally knocking it sideways against the bridge railing. The damaged support beam beneath it snapped instantly. The creature disappeared screaming into the darkness below. Then more shrieks answered from the shaft beneath them. Many more. Jax looked down once and immediately backed away. Nope. Absolutely not. Shapes moved rapidly along the shaft walls below. Climbing. Dozens of them. Move! TK shouted. The group sprinted across the maintenance bridge as the failed subjects swarmed upward through the darkness beneath them. The entire structure shook violently while clawed hands slammed against the underside of the walkway from below. Kron nearly lost his footing again as part of the bridge tore free behind them. This feels incredibly unsafe. That's because it is. Jax yelled back. One of the creatures suddenly pulled itself over the railing ahead of them. This one still wore fragments of stormtrooper armor fused directly into its gray flesh. Its jaw hung partially mechanical beneath torn skin, while red optical implants flickered wildly across its skull. The thing charged immediately. TK fired twice. The first shot tore through its shoulder. The second punched directly through its face. The creature collapsed hard against the bridge floor, then started moving again. Jax stared in disbelief. Why is it still moving? Neural override systems. Kron shouted while running. The implants keep basic motor functions active. I hate literally every word you just said. The bridge shook again. A support cable snapped somewhere behind them with a sound like artillery fire. The entire walkway tilted sharply sideways. Everyone nearly fell. Lyra slammed against the railing, while TK caught Kron by the arm seconds before the engineer slipped off the edge completely. Below them, the shaft erupted with movement. Failed subjects climbed over each other in the darkness, their shrieks echoing upward through the massive chamber, while glowing red implants flickered beneath gray skin and broken armor plating. Human once. Maybe. The Empire had taken soldiers and turned them into this. Door! Jack shouted suddenly. The far side of the shaft approached, rapidly now. A sealed blast door stood partially open beyond the collapsing bridge, while Old Republic warning lights flashed weakly overhead. Sublevel 9. Authorized personnel only. TK reached the doorway first. He grabbed the control wheel and forced the blast door wider while Lyra and Jax stumbled through behind him. Kron practically threw himself across the threshold just as another section of the maintenance bridge collapsed entirely into darkness. The shrieking grew louder instantly. The failed subjects were almost on them. "Close it," Lyra yelled. TK spun the wheel hard. The blast door groaned shut inch by inch while clawed hands slammed against the opening from the opposite side. One gray arm forced partially through the gap, fingers snapping wildly toward TK's faceplate. Jax fired directly into it. Black blood sprayed across the doorway. The arm disappeared. TK forced the wheel the rest of the way closed. The blast door slammed shut with a deafening metallic impact. Silence followed, except for the scratching. Dozens of claws scraped slowly across the other side of the door. Waiting, breathing, hunting. Jax leaned heavily against the wall, breathing hard. "Okay," he said between breaths. "I officially miss regular stormtroopers." Nobody answered. The hallway beyond Sublevel 9 stretched ahead beneath dim, white lighting completely different from the upper facility. Here the architecture looked sterile again. Medical. Rows of observation windows lined both sides of the corridor, though most had shattered long ago. Inside the rooms beyond, broken restraint chairs and overturned medical equipment remained scattered across the floors beneath years of dust and decay. TK stared silently through one of the windows while the scratching continued faintly behind them. Children's drawings covered the far wall inside the room. Crude stars, clone troopers, Republic insignias. His stomach tightened immediately. "These weren't soldiers," Lyra whispered beside him. Kron slowly checked another room farther down the corridor. Smaller beds, medical restraints scaled for children. "Dear gods," the engineer muttered quietly. TK felt another memory surface suddenly. A young boy sitting beside him in a white medical room. Scared, asking, "Are they going to fix us?" Then a scientist answering from somewhere beyond the glass. "They won't remember the pain." TK staggered backward slightly. The realization hit all at once. Phase 1 subjects weren't adult soldiers. The Empire had started with children. The failed subjects outside the blast door had once been kids taken into the Harbinger program during the Clone Wars. Lyra slowly looked toward TK. "What do they do here?" Before he could answer, the lights flickered. Then a calm Imperial voice echoed suddenly through hidden speakers overhead. "Welcome back, Subject TK-346. Everyone froze. The voice continued. "Your return was anticipated." Chapter 21. Welcome back. Nobody moved. The voice echoed softly through Sublevel 9, calm and precise beneath the flickering white lights. It sounded almost human, but not completely. Something about the tone felt too controlled, too measured, like every word had been rehearsed long before they arrived. "Welcome back, Subject TK-346. TK-346 felt the blood drain from his face. The corridor around him suddenly seemed smaller somehow. Colder. The scratching behind the blast door continued faintly while the failed subjects prowled the other side of the sealed entrance like starving animals. But even those sounds felt distant now beneath the pounding inside TK's head, because he recognized the voice. Not consciously, deeper than that. Like remembering pain, Kron slowly raised the scanner in one trembling hand. "Please tell me this facility doesn't have a talking evil computer." The speakers crackled softly overhead. "I'm not a computer." Jax immediately pointed upward. That answer somehow made it worse. Lyra stepped beside TK carefully. "You know this voice." It wasn't a question. TK stared down the corridor ahead without responding. Fragments surfaced violently through his thoughts again. Bright white rooms, medical restraints, a calm voice saying, "Begin reconstruction cycle." Then screaming. His own screaming. The overhead lights flickered again. Subject TK-346 displays elevated stress response. The voice observed calmly. Emotional instability remains consistent with prior evaluations. Jax frowned. "I officially hate whoever this is." Correction. The voice answered immediately. You have never previously met me. A hidden door slid open farther down the corridor with a soft mechanical hiss. White light spilled outward across the floor. Please proceed to observation chamber Orek. Nobody moved. TK's pulse hammered inside his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Recovery teams hunted the upper facility. The failed subjects waited behind the blast door. And somewhere inside this buried black site, the truth about Project Harbinger still waited. Lyra looked toward him carefully. TK. He finally forced himself forward. The others followed reluctantly. Observation Chamber Orek looked untouched by time. Unlike the ruined upper levels of the facility, this room remained pristine beneath sterile white lighting. Massive transparent steel observation windows lined both walls, while rows of medical consoles still hummed softly with active power. And in the center of the room stood a chair. Metal restraints extended from the armrests and legs. Neural cables hung overhead. TK stopped walking immediately. Memory hit him like a blaster shot. The same chair, the same room. A younger version of himself struggling against the restraints, while scientists watch from behind the glass. Subject resistant to memory suppression. Increased neural pressure. Proceed. Pain exploded behind TK's eyes. He staggered sideways against one of the consoles, breathing hard beneath the helmet. Lyra grabbed his arm instantly. Hey, I remember this place. His voice sounded distant, broken. Jax slowly scanned the room around them. What exactly did they do to you here? Before TK answered, the far wall illuminated suddenly. A hologram flickered to life above the central console. An Imperial officer appeared. Older, thin-faced, sharp gray eyes beneath Republic-era medical insignias. Director Malrek, the same man from the archive recordings aboard the Judicator. Except this hologram looked younger. Alive. Project Harbinger Log 1. The hologram began calmly. Kron muttered quietly. Oh, that's definitely not ominous. The recording continued. The Clone Wars revealed a critical weakness within military personnel. Behind Malrek, several clone troopers stood motionless inside observation chambers. Individual identity creates emotional attachment. Emotional attachment creates hesitation. One clone inside the chamber suddenly removed his helmet. Young, terrified, a child. Lyra stared at the hologram in disbelief. They were children. Phase 1 subjects were selected for neurological adaptability. Malrek continued. Early conditioning proved effective, though physical degeneration remains problematic. The hologram shifted. Images filled the walls around them now. Medical footage. Children connected to neural machinery. Memory implantation diagrams. Behavioral correction procedures. And among the subjects, TK saw himself. Younger. No armor. No number yet. Just a terrified child sitting inside this exact room. The world tilted beneath him. No. Another memory surfaced instantly. A boy sitting beside him during testing. Dark hair. Scared eyes. Asking quietly, "What was your name before?" TK remembered answering. But not the answer itself. Because they took it. They took all of it. The hologram continued speaking. Phase 1 ultimately failed due to excessive psychological fragmentation. The images shifted again. Now the children appeared older. Violent. Unstable. The failed subjects. Surviving assets were transferred to sub-level containment after degeneration. Jax stared at the walls horrified. You left them alive down here. Preservation of research remained essential. The voice no longer came from the hologram. It came live through the speakers again. Current. Watching them. Lyra looked upward sharply. Who are you? A pause followed. Then, I am Director Malrek. Silence filled the observation chamber. Kron frowned immediately. That's impossible. Malrek's hologram was decades old. He should have been dead. The voice answered calmly. My biological functions ceased 19 years ago. Jax blinked once. I'm sorry, what? Project Harbinger required continuity. Therefore, my consciousness was preserved within the Orek Central Intelligence Network. Kron looked horrified. They uploaded his brain into the facility. Correction. Malrek answered. I uploaded myself. Lightning flashed faintly beyond the distant cliffside windows somewhere above the ocean. TK stared at the restraint chair in the center of the room, while another terrible realization formed slowly inside his thoughts. Project Harbinger had never ended. The Empire had simply buried it underground, and the man responsible for it was still here. Chapter 22. Memory. The lights dimmed slightly as Director Malrek spoke. Not enough to darken the observation chamber completely, just enough to make the sterile white room feel colder somehow. The medical consoles continued humming softly around them, while rain thundered faintly through the cliffside structure far above. TK-346 could barely breathe. His eyes remained locked on the restraint chair in the center of the room. Memory after memory kept surfacing now, broken fragments forcing themselves upward through years of suppression. The smell of antiseptic, needles, children crying somewhere beyond the observation glass, and Malrek's voice repeating the same sentence endlessly. You will not remember. The overhead speakers crackled again. Your emotional distress is understandable. Subject TK-346. TK looked upward sharply. Do not refer to me by that designation. A brief silence followed. Then, you no longer remember your original name. The words hit harder than any blaster shot. Because they were true, TK tried desperately to remember something. Anything from before the Empire. A home. Parents. A real name. Nothing came. Only white rooms and pain. Jax looked between the restraint chair and the observation windows uneasily. Okay, I'm officially voting we burn this entire planet down. Kron slowly circled one of the medical consoles while reading faded Republic labels beneath the dust. They started this during the Clone Wars, he muttered quietly. That means the Republic approved it first. Nobody answered, because everyone knew he was right. The Empire hadn't created Project Harbinger. It inherited it, like so many other horrors. Lyra stared at the walls covered in medical footage. How many children? The speakers remained silent briefly. Then Malrek answered calmly. Phase 1 contained 83 subjects. Jax froze. 83. 31 survived initial neural reconstruction. The failed subjects outside the blast door suddenly felt much more horrifying. Not monsters. Children turned into weapons. Children abandoned underground when the experiments failed. TK clenched his fists so tightly his gloves creaked. You destroyed them. No, Malrek replied evenly. We improved them. The statement snapped something inside TK. He crossed the room instantly and slammed both hands against the nearest medical console hard enough to crack the display screen. They were children. His voice echoed violently through the chamber. For the first time since the crash aboard the Judicator, genuine rage completely overpowered discipline. You took children and turned them into experiments. The speakers remained calm. War required adaptation. TK grabbed the restraint chair and hurled it sideways across the room. Metal crashed violently against the observation glass while sparks erupted from broken restraints. TK, Lyra stepped toward him cautiously, but he barely heard her because more memories kept returning. Not all at once, just enough. A younger version of himself standing inside a Republic transport beside dozens of frightened children wearing identical gray uniforms. Clone troopers escorting them through this facility. Malrek speaking behind the glass. Identity must be removed before loyalty can be perfected. Then years later, Black Echo Squad standing in formation after a deployment while Imperial officers reviewed psychological reports. Vask arguing with someone again. They're getting worse. Then Malrek's voice. Conditioning degradation is expected. TK staggered backward slightly. Black Echo hadn't just been tested after recruitment. They had belonged to Harbinger their entire lives. The realization hollowed him out completely. Lyra stepped beside him carefully now. TK. He finally looked toward her. I don't know who I am. The admission sounded smaller than he expected. Not angry anymore. Just tired. Lyra held his gaze steadily despite the tension filling the room around them. You're the one who chose to protect us. TK almost laughed bitterly. You think that makes up for what I've done? No, she answered honestly. That surprised him. But it means you still have a choice. Before TK could respond, every light inside the observation chamber suddenly shifted red. Alarm sirens screamed throughout sublevel 9 instantly. Kron looked toward the nearest terminal. The speakers crackled violently overhead. Not calm anymore. Distorted. Urgent. Warning. Recovery units have breached upper containment sectors. Jack swore loudly. Fantastic. Another voice cut through the speakers immediately afterward. Cold. Mechanical. Directive confirmed. All Harbinger evidence scheduled for termination. TK recognized that voice instantly. Commander Vorlin, the recovery teams had reached the lower facility, and they weren't coming to retrieve anything anymore. They were coming to erase it. The observation windows suddenly illuminated with emergency tactical displays showing movement throughout the black site. Recovery units advancing through the corridors above. Stormtroopers securing exits. And farther down, something worse. Rows of containment chambers inside sublevel 9 beginning to unlock automatically. Kron stared at the display in horror. Please tell me that's not what I think it is. Malrek's voice returned through the speakers quietly. Director Vorlin has initiated facility purge protocols. One containment chamber after another flashed green across the schematic. Released. 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 The scratching behind the blast door stopped completely. That silence terrified TK more than the noise ever had. Then, somewhere deep beneath the facility, the failed subjects began screaming together. Chapter 23. Purge Protocol. The screaming spread through sublevel 9 like a wave. Dozens of voices echoed upward from the lower containment sectors beneath the observation chamber, distorted somewhere between human agony and animal rage. The sound vibrated through the walls themselves, filling the facility with something primal and horrifying. The failed subjects were loose, and now they were hunting. Red emergency lights pulsed across the observation chamber, while alarm sirens screamed overhead without pause. Facility purge active. All personnel evacuate immediately. Kron stared at the tactical schematic in disbelief as containment markers across sublevel 9 continued switching from red to green one after another. There are way too many green lights, he muttered. Jax tightened his grip on the rifle. How many of those things are down here? The speakers answered immediately. 23 viable Phase 1 subjects remain operational. Jax blinked once. You say viable like that's supposed to be comforting. Another scream echoed through the lower corridors. Closer this time. TK-346 forced himself away from the shattered restraint chair, while the rage inside him slowly settled into something colder. Clearer. Malrek's words still echoed through his thoughts. Identity must be removed before loyalty can be perfected. That was the Empire, not just Project Harbinger. Everything. Stormtroopers stripped of names. Clone soldiers treated as disposable. Entire worlds crushed beneath order. The Empire didn't fear disobedience because it threatened authority. It feared individuality itself, because individuals could choose. And choice was dangerous. TK. Lyra's voice pulled him back again. He looked toward her. We need to move. She was right. The facility was collapsing into chaos now. Recovery teams sweeping downward from above. Failed subjects released from containment below. And somewhere between them, Black Echo Squad trapped in the middle. TK looked toward the tactical display. One route still remained partially open, the central reactor core. Kron noticed it too immediately. No, Jax frowned. You said that pretty fast, because I know exactly what he's thinking. TK already moved toward the doorway. We destroy the facility. Kron threw his hands upward. There it is. Lyra stepped beside TK. If the Empire wipes this place clean, Harbinger disappears forever. And maybe that's good, Jax argued. No, TK answered quietly. Everyone looked toward him. He stared at the medical footage still frozen across the walls of the observation chamber. At the children inside those recordings. at the failed subjects screaming somewhere beneath the facility. They buried this once already. The room fell silent, because everyone understood. If Black Site Orek vanished quietly again, Project Harbinger would survive somewhere else. Different facility, different subjects, different children. The Empire would simply begin again. Kron sighed heavily. I hate when moral responsibility appears. Another explosion thundered somewhere above them. Dust rained from the ceiling. Recovery teams were getting closer. Then suddenly the observation chamber doors slid open automatically. Everyone spun toward the entrance. For several seconds, only darkness waited beyond the corridor. Then something limped slowly into the room. Gray skin, mechanical implants, one glowing red eye. The failed subject stopped beneath the emergency lights, breathing heavily. Not attacking, watching. Jax raised his rifle instantly. TK, the creature's body looked horribly damaged. Old surgical scars stretched across its spine, while fragments of Republic armor remained fused into the flesh along one shoulder. Most horrifying of all, it looked young, not a child anymore, but not fully grown either. The subject stared directly at TK, then spoke. One broken word. Brother. Nobody moved. The creature staggered another step forward. TK's pulse hammered in his chest, because suddenly, he remembered him. The boy from the memories. The one who asked, "What was your name before?" Dark hair. Scared eyes. Subject CT-17. Another Phase 1 child. Still alive. The failed subject's mechanical eye flickered weakly. They left us. Its voice sounded ruined, like speaking physically hurt. TK lowered the rifle slowly. Lyra looked stunned. He recognizes you. The creature stared at TK with something that looked almost like confusion. We waited. Another violent tremor shook the facility. Blaster fire erupted somewhere down the corridor outside. Recovery teams. Close now. The failed subject flinched instantly at the sound, terrified. Not aggressive. Traumatized. TK felt sick. These things hunting through the facility weren't monsters. They were abandoned children trapped inside broken bodies. Another burst of blaster fire echoed nearby, followed by Imperial shouting. Sector clear. Move to observation wing. Jax looked toward the corridor. We're out of time. Then suddenly the failed subject looked toward the hallway too. Its mechanical eye flickered rapidly. Fear transformed instantly into rage. The creature shrieked violently and turned back toward TK. They came back. Then it sprinted from the room. Fast. Far faster than human movement. A second later, screams erupted from the corridor outside as the failed subject slammed directly into the advancing stormtroopers. Blaster fire exploded through the hallway. Imperial shouting filled the facility. And for the first time since entering Black Site Orek, TK realized the failed subjects weren't hunting randomly. They remembered exactly who abandoned them down here. And now the Empire had returned. Chapter 24. Reactor Core. The corridor outside observation wing descended into chaos. Blaster fire flashed through the darkness in violent bursts of red, while stormtroopers shouted over one another somewhere beyond the intersecting hallways. The shrieks of the failed subjects echoed through Sublevel 9 like hunting calls now, moving rapidly through the ventilation shafts and maintenance corridors beneath the facility. Then came the screaming. Human screaming. Jax looked toward the hallway uneasily. I know they're Imperials, he muttered, but that's still horrifying. TK-346 understood what he meant. The failed subjects attacked with terrifying speed, but not mindlessly. There was rage behind it now. Recognition. Years of abandonment twisted into something feral and violent. And the Empire had walked directly back into their prison. Kron activated the tactical schematic again, while sparks rained from a damaged ceiling panel overhead. Okay, he said quickly. Reactor core is 4 levels below us. Jax stared at him. There are 4 more levels beneath the underground monster lab. This facility was apparently designed by psychopaths. Lyra checked the corridor outside carefully before turning back toward TK. If we destroy the reactor, the entire Black Site goes with it. TK nodded once. That was the point. The Harbinger files. The laboratories. the cryogenic chambers. All of it needed to disappear permanently. Not buried again. Destroyed. Another burst of blaster fire erupted nearby. Closer. A stormtrooper suddenly stumbled into the observation chamber doorway, clutching his throat where deep claw marks cut through white armor plating. The trooper collapsed hard against the floor, dead before he stopped moving. Jack stepped backward immediately. Move now. Immediately. Nobody disagreed. The group pushed deeper into Sublevel 9 through narrow service corridors, lit only by flickering emergency lights, while the facility tore itself apart around them. Smoke drifted through the ventilation systems now, carrying the smell of burning circuitry and blood deeper into the underground sectors. The farther they descended, the older the facility became. Imperial architecture faded completely, replaced by original Republic construction buried beneath decades of modifications and corrosion. Medical wings gave way to industrial reactor corridors lined with massive coolant pipes and ancient fusion conduits humming beneath the floor. This part of Orek had existed long before the Empire, long before Project Harbinger, maybe even before the Clone Wars. Kron checked the schematic again while they moved. There's an access tunnel ahead leading directly into the reactor chamber. Security? Lyra asked. Extremely. Wonderful. That's not the bad part. Jax groaned. There's always a bad part. Kron zoomed the display in. Recovery teams are converging on the reactor too. TK frowned immediately. What? Nobody answered at first. Then Lyra understood. Because they're trying to erase the facility themselves. Exactly. Commander Vorlin didn't care about recovery anymore. Project Harbinger had become compromised beyond containment. Now the Empire wanted only one thing: total destruction. The realization accelerated everything. They weren't racing to destroy Orek anymore. They were racing against the Empire destroying it first. Another sound echoed faintly through the corridor ahead. Heavy footsteps. Disciplined. Mechanical. Recovery units. TK immediately raised one fist. The group stopped moving. Flashlights appeared around the corner farther ahead. 3 black-armored recovery operatives advanced through the corridor in perfect formation, rifles scanning the darkness methodically while red optical sensors glowed beneath polished helmets. Different from the stormtroopers upstairs. Calmer. More precise. One operative stopped suddenly. Its helmet tilted slightly. Thermal signatures detected. TK reacted instantly. Down! Blaster fire erupted through the corridor as recovery operatives opened fire without hesitation. Red plasma bolts slammed into the walls while TK and Lyra returned fire from opposite sides of the hallway. The confined corridor amplified every shot into deafening explosions. One operative dropped immediately after TK punched a bolt through the weak point beneath its shoulder armor. The remaining 2 advanced anyway. No fear, no hesitation, just objective completion. Jax fired wildly from behind a coolant pipe. Why are all the Empire's scary troops impossible to emotionally damage? Conditioning, Kron shouted back. That's becoming a pattern. One operative lunged forward suddenly through the blaster fire, moving faster than normal stormtroopers should have been capable of moving. TK recognized the movement instantly. Harbinger training. The operative slammed into Lyra hard enough to drive her against the wall while raising a combat blade toward her throat. TK fired point blank. The bolt struck directly through the operative's visor. The black-armored soldier collapsed immediately. The final operative turned toward TK. Then something exploded from the ventilation shaft above it. Gray flesh. Claws. Teeth. The failed subject tore through the recovery operative violently, driving both of them against the far wall in a frenzy of shrieking and blaster fire. Black armor ripped apart beneath clawed hands. The operative tried firing upward blindly, but the failed subject slammed its head repeatedly against the wall until the helmet cracked open beneath black blood and exposed machinery. Then silence. The failed subject looked toward TK again briefly. Recognition flashed in its mechanical eye. Then it disappeared back into the ventilation shaft before anyone could react. Jack stared upward slowly. I don't know whether we're being helped or hunted anymore. Both, TK answered quietly. The corridor shook violently beneath their feet. This tremor felt different, deeper. Kron checked the scanner immediately. Oh no, Jax pointed accusingly. You've got to stop saying that. The reactor's destabilizing. TK looked toward the lower access hatch ahead. How long? Kron's expression tightened. Not long enough. Chapter 25. Commander Vorlin. The reactor levels were burning. Heat slammed into the group the moment they forced open the lower access hatch beneath sublevel 9. Waves of steam rolled through the corridor beyond, while warning sirens echoed endlessly through the industrial chamber below. Massive fusion conduits stretched across the walls, glowing bright orange beneath overloaded power flow, and every few seconds another explosion thundered somewhere deeper inside the facility. Blacksite Orek was dying. TK-346 moved first through the hatch with rifle raised while the others followed close behind. The reactor sector looked enormous compared to the sterile laboratory wings above. Catwalks crisscrossed over a massive cylindrical reactor core, descending endlessly into darkness, while sparks rained from damage control stations along the surrounding platforms. And Imperial troops were already here. Bodies covered the lower catwalks. Stormtroopers, recovery operatives, failed subjects, most of them torn apart during fighting that had clearly spread through the reactor sector minutes earlier. Jax looked across the carnage uneasily. This place turned into hell fast. No, TK answered quietly. He stared at the reactor chamber around them. It always was. Kron moved toward a damaged terminal station while Lyra secured the nearest catwalk intersection. The engineer activated the controls manually. The screen flickered violently before stabilizing. Then his face drained of color. Okay, he muttered. That's very bad. Jack sighed heavily. I miss when our problems were only emotionally devastating. Kron pointed toward the reactor display. The Empire already initiated the self-destruct sequence. TK stepped beside him. A countdown blinked across the terminal. Reactor purge active core detonation in 14 minutes and 32 seconds. Lyra frowned. Can we stop it? Kron looked at her like she'd asked him to reverse gravity. Why would we want to? She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Right? Destroying Orek was the goal. The problem wasn't the reactor exploding. The problem was escaping before it did. Another burst of blaster fire echoed across the reactor chamber suddenly. Everyone turned instantly. A squad of black-armored recovery operatives emerged onto the opposite catwalk through drifting steam, rifles raised in perfect formation. And standing behind them was Commander Vorlin. The officer wore dark Imperial Command armor beneath a long black coat, streaked with rain and soot from the upper levels. Unlike the recovery teams surrounding him, Vorlin moved slowly, calmly, like none of the chaos around him mattered. His eyes locked immediately onto TK. There you are. The voice matched perfectly. Cold, controlled. The same voice from the transmissions aboard the Judicator. Vorlin stepped forward slightly while the recovery operatives spread across the catwalk behind him. You've caused significant complications, TK-346. Jax immediately whispered, I hate this guy already. Vorlin ignored him completely. His attention remained fixed on TK alone. You were valuable once, Vorlin continued calmly. Black Echo exceeded all expectations during field deployment. TK tightened his grip on the rifle. You erased us. No, Vorlin corrected. We improved you. The same language. The same justification. Project Harbinger existed in every level of Imperial Command. Lyra stepped beside TK. You experimented on children. Vorlin barely glanced toward her. The Republic began the program. The Empire perfected it. Kron muttered quietly. That might actually be the most Imperial sentence I've ever heard. Vorlin folded his hands behind his back while reactor alarms screamed around the chamber. Project Harbinger represented the future of military stability. His gaze shifted toward the failed subject corpses scattered across the lower catwalks. Unfortunately, emotional degradation remained unavoidable. TK stared at him. Those were children. They became assets. The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without guilt. And suddenly TK understood something important. Vorlin truly believed this. To him, Harbinger wasn't cruelty. It was efficiency. That made him far worse than Malrek. Because Malrek sounded obsessed. Vorlin sounded rational. The commander looked toward TK again. You are one of the last stable subjects remaining. He tilted his head slightly. Your survival instinct alone should make this decision obvious. TK already knew what he meant. Surrender. Return to the Empire. Be corrected. Vorlin gestured subtly toward the recovery operatives. You were conditioned to serve a purpose, TK-346. Do not throw your life away for fugitives and terrorists. Jax looked offended. Rude. Lyra ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on TK. Waiting. Not telling him what to choose. Just waiting to see if the choice would finally be his. The reactor alarms grew louder. Core failure in 12 minutes and 8 seconds. Steam erupted from a ruptured conduit nearby. Vorlin's expression never changed. The Empire can still restore you, he said calmly. Memory instability is reversible. TK felt the anger rising again. Not explosive rage this time. Something steadier. He looked around the reactor chamber. At the failed subjects lying dead across the catwalks. At the Harbinger files still hidden in Kron's satchel. At Lyra, standing beside him despite every reason not to trust him. Then finally back toward Vorlin. You think removing memory removes guilt? Vorlin frowned slightly. That is irrelevant. No, TK answered quietly. For the first time in my life. He tightened his grip on the rifle. I think it's the only thing that matters. Vorlin stared at him silently. Then sighed once. Almost disappointed. So be it. The commander stepped backward. The recovery operatives raised their rifles instantly. Then the reactor chamber exploded into war. Chapter 26. Catwalk War. Blaster fire erupted across the reactor chamber in a storm of red light. Recovery operatives opened fire instantly from the upper catwalk, while TK-346 and the others dove for cover behind overloaded reactor conduits as plasma bolts shredded the metal around them. Sparks exploded through the air, while steam burst violently from ruptured pipes overhead. The reactor core roared beneath the chamber like a living thing dying slowly underground. TK rolled behind a coolant manifold and fired upward immediately. One recovery operative dropped after a clean shot through the neck seal beneath its helmet, but the others kept advancing without hesitation. No fear, no panic, just objective completion. Exactly what Project Harbinger had tried to create. Jax fired wildly from behind a collapsed terminal station. Why are all of the Empire's elite soldiers emotionally dead? Because it's easier to control them. Lyra shouted back while returning fire. Vorlin remained behind the advancing operatives, perfectly calm amid the chaos. The commander didn't even raise a weapon. He simply watched, observing, like this was another field test. Kron crouched near the reactor control terminal, desperately working through override commands while sparks rained across the console around him. Good news, he yelled. No, Jax shouted immediately. No more good news. The reactor explosion got worse. That's not. And I found an evacuation route. Jax paused. Okay, that one's better. TK fired again toward the upper catwalk while the recovery teams split formation, moving to flank both sides of the chamber simultaneously. They adapted fast. Too fast. One operative vaulted directly over the railing above and landed on the lower platform near Lyra with terrifying speed. The black-armored soldier lunged instantly with an electrified combat blade. Lyra barely blocked the strike with her rifle. The impact knocked her backward hard against the railing overlooking the reactor shaft. The operative raised the blade again. Then Jax shot it twice through the chest. The operative collapsed sideways into the reactor pit below. Jax looked toward Lyra. You're welcome. Don't get confident. I'm extremely confident. Another explosion rocked the reactor chamber violently. One of the upper catwalk supports snapped completely, sending a section of metal walkway crashing downward into the reactor core beneath them in a shower of sparks and flame. The countdown display flashed faster now. Core failure in 941. Steam flooded the chamber. Visibility dropped instantly. TK moved through the smoke carefully, while recovery operatives advanced between the reactor conduits like shadows beneath the flashing emergency lights. Then suddenly, something shrieked from the ventilation systems above. Everyone froze. The failed subjects had reached the reactor level. A gray shape dropped from the ceiling directly onto one of the recovery operatives near the upper platform. Claws tore through black armor while the operative fired wildly into the smoke before both vanished over the railing into darkness below. Then another failed subject emerged. Then 3 more. The reactor chamber descended into complete chaos. Failed subjects attacked, everything moving. Recovery teams returned fire. Stormtroopers entering the lower sector were torn apart almost immediately. The shrieks echoed endlessly through the chamber while black blood splattered across the catwalks beneath flashing reactor light. Vorlin finally reacted. The commander stepped backward toward the central reactor platform while drawing a compact blaster pistol calmly from beneath his coat. One failed subject lunged toward him from the smoke. Vorlin shot it once directly through the eye without hesitation. The creature collapsed instantly. Cold efficiency. TK saw it clearly now. Vorlin wasn't a fanatic. He wasn't screaming Imperial propaganda or ranting about order. That made him more terrifying. He simply believed people were tools. Nothing more. Another failed subject dropped onto the lower catwalk near TK. This one still wore fragments of old clone armor fused into gray flesh, while exposed implants pulsed visibly along its spine. It looked toward TK, paused. Recognition flickered briefly across its ruined face. Then it turned away from him completely and charged a nearby stormtrooper instead. Jax noticed too. Why aren't they attacking you? TK didn't answer. Because he knew, somewhere deep inside, whatever remained of their broken memories, they still recognized him as one of them. The realization felt awful. Kron suddenly shouted from the reactor controls. I found the purge override. Lyra looked toward him immediately. Can you stop the explosion? No. Then what does the override do? Kron looked up grimly. It forces the reactor to blow now instead of later. Everyone stared at him. The engineer pointed desperately toward the far end of the chamber where an emergency tram tunnel blinked green across the tactical display. That's our only escape route before this place vaporizes. TK looked toward the tunnel. Too far. Recovery operatives still controlled most of the upper platforms between them and the tram line, and Vorlin stood directly in the path. The commander looked toward TK through drifting steam, almost knowingly, like he understood exactly what choice came next. Then Vorlin activated something on his wrist console. Immediately, every recovery operative in the chamber stopped firing, stopped moving entirely. Then, in perfect synchronization, they all turned toward TK. Target priority updated. Not escape. Not survival. Him. Vorlin's voice echoed calmly across the reactor chamber. Terminate subject TK-346. Chapter 27. Terminate. Every recovery operative in the reactor chamber turned toward TK-346 at once. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Black helmets shifted in perfect synchronization beneath the flashing reactor lights, while red optical sensors locked onto him through drifting steam and smoke. Even the operatives engaged with failed subjects broke formation instantly, abandoning all other targets without hesitation. One objective remained. Terminate subject TK-346. Jax looked around in disbelief. Okay, that feels deeply personal. Then the recovery teams charged. Blaster fire erupted from every direction simultaneously. TK threw himself sideways behind a ruptured coolant conduit as plasma bolts shredded the catwalk around him. Metal exploded overhead, while warning sirens screamed through the reactor chamber louder than ever. The Empire want him dead now. Not recovered, not corrected, erased. And somehow that hurt more than it should have. Lyra fired from behind the reactor controls, dropping one operative advancing along the upper platform, while another immediately stepped over the body without slowing down. They're ignoring everyone else. Because Vorlin thinks I'm the problem. TK shouted back. You are the problem. Jax yelled from somewhere through the smoke. Just currently on our side. Another operative vaulted directly over the lower railing toward TK's position. The black-armored soldier landed hard against the catwalk and opened fire instantly. TK rolled beneath the first volley before driving forward into the operative at close range. The two slammed against the reactor railing while the operative tried forcing its rifle downward toward TK's chest. Strong. Too strong. Harbinger enhancements. The operative moved with the same terrifying precision as the prototype aboard the Judicator. TK caught a glimpse of exposed wiring beneath damaged armor, plating near its neck. Modified. Not fully human anymore. The realization fueled his anger. He slammed the operative's helmet repeatedly against the railing until cracks spread across the black visor. Then finally fired point-blank beneath the chin seal. The operative collapsed immediately. Another one replaced it seconds later. No hesitation. No emotion. Just function. TK barely blocked the incoming combat blade before Lyra shot the operative through the spine from behind. The black-armored soldier dropped twitching beside the reactor shaft. Lyra grabbed TK's arm roughly. Move! The reactor chamber shook violently again. This time the entire lower catwalk tilted sharply sideways as another support structure failed somewhere below them. Several failed subjects lost their footing completely and vanished screaming into the reactor core beneath the chamber. Core failure in 612. Steam erupted from the central reactor columns in massive white bursts. The countdown accelerated faster now. Kron shouted from the control console through the chaos. TK turned immediately. The engineer pointed toward the far emergency tram tunnel blinking green across the chamber. Go! TK looked toward the tunnel, then toward Vorlin standing calmly on the upper platform beyond it. The commander still hadn't joined the fight personally. He simply watched while recovery operatives died around him, observing, calculating, like TK was still part of an experiment. Another failed subject lunged toward Vorlin suddenly from the smoke. The commander drew his pistol smoothly and fired once through its skull before the creature even reached him. Perfect accuracy. Perfect calm. Vorlin looked directly toward TK again, then activated another command on the wrist console. The remaining recovery operatives stopped moving instantly. Then, one by one, they began advancing directly into the reactor core. Jax stared in disbelief. What are they doing? TK realized first, clearing the blast radius. Vorlin was sacrificing his own troops without hesitation, not even ordering them to hold position, just walking them into death because it improved operational efficiency. The operatives obeyed completely. Not one resisted. Not one hesitated. They marched directly into the burning reactor shaft beneath the chamber, while failed subjects tore into them from the surrounding catwalks. Disposable assets. That was all they were. The same thing Black Echo Squad would have become eventually. The same thing TK almost still was. Vorlin stepped forward through the steam toward the central catwalk, now armed only with the compact pistol at his side. No more experiments, he called calmly across the reactor chamber. No more reconstruction. His eyes locked on a TK. You made your choice. Then the commander drew a second weapon from beneath his coat. A long black energy blade ignited instantly with a sharp mechanical hiss. Not a lightsaber. Something colder. Industrial. Designed for execution. Jax blinked once. Okay, why does the scary Imperial commander suddenly have an evil sword? Vorlin began walking toward TK slowly through the reactor smoke. Because, Lyra answered quietly, he plans on killing him personally. The reactor alarm screamed louder. Steam flooded the chamber. Failed subjects shrieked through the shadows around them. And suddenly TK understood the truth. Vorlin didn't hate him. This wasn't revenge. It was disposal. TK represented proof that Project Harbinger could fail, that conditioning could break, that soldiers could choose something other than obedience, and the Empire could never allow that truth to survive. Vorlin stopped several meters away. The black energy blade hummed softly in one hand. Last opportunity, TK-346. The commander's voice remained perfectly calm even now. Surrender. TK looked around the reactor chamber, at the dead operatives, at the failed subjects, at the children the Empire buried beneath this planet, then toward Lyra standing behind him. Finally, he removed his stormtrooper helmet slowly for the first time since the crash aboard the Judicator. Vorlin watched carefully. TK dropped the helmet onto the burning catwalk beside him, then raised the rifle. No. Chapter 28. The Choice. The helmet rolled slowly across the catwalk. White plastoid scraped against scorched metal before finally stopping near the reactor railing beneath flashing red emergency lights. Steam drifted across it in thick waves while the alarms of black site Orek screamed louder through the collapsing chamber. For a moment, nobody moved. Not Lyra. Not Jax. Not even the failed subjects prowling the reactor levels through smoke and darkness. Everyone stared at the abandoned helmet lying beside the reactor core. TK-346 no longer looked like a stormtrooper without it. That realization hit harder than expected. He looked younger somehow. Human. Exhausted. A man instead of a weapon. Vorlin studied him silently from across the catwalk, black energy blade humming softly in one hand. You believe removing the armor changes what you are? TK tightened his grip on the rifle. No, he answered quietly. It means you don't anymore. The reactor chamber trembled violently. A support column exploded somewhere above them, raining sparks and molten metal across the upper platforms while failed subjects shrieked through the smoke below. Core failure ion 4 minutes and 47 seconds. Kron shouted from the reactor controls. This feels like the moment everyone should start running. Nobody listened. Vorlin stepped forward slowly. The Empire gave you purpose. No, TK answered. It gave me orders. Another step. You were created to serve stability. TK almost laughed. The sound came out bitter instead. You took children and turned them into monsters. Vorlin's expression never changed. Sacrifice built the Empire. That sentence settled something inside TK permanently. Because for the first time, he truly understood. People like Vorlin would never stop. Not because they were cruel for cruelty's sake. Because they believed suffering was acceptable if it produced order. Project Harbinger wasn't a mistake to them. It was progress. And if Orek disappeared quietly beneath the ocean, they would simply build another facility somewhere else. Another program. Another generation of children without names. Vorlin raised the blade slightly. You were engineered to obey. That instinct still exists inside you. TK thought about that. About every memory the Empire erased. Every order followed without question. Every village burned beneath black echo deployments. The guilt remained. Real. Nothing would change that. But now, for the first time, the choice belonged to him. Vorlin attacked suddenly. Fast. Far faster than TK expected. The black energy blade sliced through the air toward his throat while steam exploded around them from ruptured pipes overhead. TK barely blocked the strike with the rifle before the impact sent pain shooting through both arms instantly. The weapon cracked down the center. Vorlin struck again immediately. Precise. Controlled. Not rage. Execution. TK ducked beneath the next strike and drove forward hard enough to slam both of them against the reactor railing overlooking the burning core beneath the chamber. Vorlin elbowed him across the jaw instantly. TK staggered sideways. The commander pressed the attack without hesitation. Every movement efficient. Minimal. Like he trained specifically for killing people faster and more effectively than everyone around him. Which TK realized he probably had. The black blade carved sparks from the catwalk as TK barely avoided another strike. Then Lyra fired. Vorlin moved impossibly fast. The commander pivoted sideways and deflected the blaster bolt off the energy blade itself before turning the pistol toward her. TK slammed into him before he could fire. Both men crashed hard against the catwalk again. The reactor chamber shook violently beneath them. Another section of the upper platform collapsed into the reactor shaft, while failed subjects and recovery operatives alike disappeared, screaming into the burning core below. Jax grabbed Kron by the arm near the reactor controls. "Tell me you have an escape plan." "I have half of one." "That's not enough plan." Vorlin drove a knee into TK's ribs hard enough to reopen injuries from the Judicator crash. Pain exploded through him. The commander grabbed TK by the throat immediately afterward and slammed him against the railing overlooking the reactor shaft. The energy blade hummed inches from his face. "You were valuable once," Vorlin said quietly. "Now you are unstable." TK stared back at him through the reactor smoke. "You think people are machines." Vorlin's grip tightened. "People are machines." Then the failed subject hit him from behind. The gray creature slammed into Vorlin hard enough to throw both of them sideways across the catwalk. Claws tore through the commander's shoulder armor while the failed subject shrieked violently in his face. Vorlin stabbed it instantly through the chest. The creature convulsed once, then collapsed beside him twitching. But before dying, it looked toward TK. Recognition flickered weakly through its mechanical eye again. Then it whispered one final word. "Run." The reactor alarms shifted pitch instantly. Core detonation imminent. Kron looked up in horror. "That's new." The catwalk beneath them began collapsing section by section toward the reactor core. Vorlin rose slowly through the smoke despite the blood spreading across his damaged armor. Still calm, still advancing. And TK suddenly realized something terrible. Even now, Vorlin believed he was right. Chapter 29. Collapse. The reactor core began tearing itself apart. Warning sirens shifted into one continuous mechanical scream, while the entire chamber shook violently beneath waves of overload energy surging through the collapsing systems below. Massive arcs of blue electricity exploded across the reactor shaft as fusion conduits ruptured one after another in blinding flashes of light. The catwalk beneath TK-346 cracked down the center. Metal screamed. Then part of the platform collapsed entirely into the reactor core below. Heat blasted upward through the chamber hard enough to scorch exposed skin. Kron looked at the tactical display and immediately paled. "We have maybe 3 minutes before this entire facility becomes a crater." Jax grabbed him by the shoulder. "And somehow you're saying that calmly." "I've emotionally detached." Vorlin stepped through the smoke toward TK again. Even injured, even bleeding. The commander's damaged shoulder armor sparked where the failed subject tore into moments earlier, but his grip on the black energy blade never wavered. "Your survival instinct should be stronger than this," Vorlin said calmly. TK stared at him in disbelief. The facility was collapsing around them. Recovery operatives and failed subjects still fought through the lower reactor levels beneath endless screams and blaster fire. And Vorlin still talked like this was an intellectual disagreement instead of a disaster. "You still don't understand," TK said quietly. Vorlin tilted his head slightly. "Understand what?" TK looked around the reactor chamber, at the dead stormtroopers, the failed subjects, the abandoned helmet near the railing, then finally back toward Vorlin. "You lost." For the first time, the commander's expression changed. Not anger, confusion. TK stepped forward slowly despite the pain ripping through his ribs. "You built Project Harbinger to erase choice." He pointed toward the burning reactor core beneath them. "And now your own soldiers are dying to protect it while the Empire destroys the evidence itself." Vorlin's jaw tightened slightly. "Necessary sacrifice." "No," TK answered. "Fear." The word landed harder than blaster fire. Because it was true. The Empire feared people who could think for themselves. Feared individuality. Feared guilt. Feared memory. Vorlin attacked instantly. The black energy blade slashed downward toward TK's chest, But this time, TK moved first. Not like a stormtrooper, not following drilled combat patterns or conditioned responses. Instinct. Choice. He caught Vorlin's injured arm and twisted hard enough to force the blade sideways into the reactor railing. The metal exploded apart in sparks. Vorlin reacted immediately, driving his pistol toward TK's stomach. Then Lyra shot the weapon from his hand. The blaster spun away into the reactor shaft below. Vorlin turned toward her instantly, and TK hit him hard. Both men crashed through the damaged railing together. For one horrifying second, they hung over open air above the reactor core. Then Vorlin caught the edge of the catwalk with one hand. TK grabbed another support beam nearby, barely seconds before falling completely into the burning reactor beneath them. Heat roared upward around both men, while blue energy surged below like a contained star collapsing inward. Vorlin hung, suspended beside him over the abyss. Still calm, still composed somehow. The commander looked directly at TK through drifting smoke. "You think this changes anything?" TK struggled to hold the support beam as the metal groaned beneath him. "The Empire will survive this." "I know. Then what exactly did you accomplish?" TK looked upward, toward Lyra, standing on the collapsing catwalk above them, toward Jax and Kron trying desperately to reach the tram tunnel before the chamber exploded, toward the abandoned stormtrooper helmet lying near the reactor edge, then back toward Vorlin. For the first time in my life, the support beam beneath TK cracked loudly. I made my own choice. Vorlin stared at him silently. Then the catwalk above them collapsed. Everything happened at once. Metal tore free. Steam exploded through the chamber. The support beam snapped beneath TK's weight. He grabbed desperately for the remaining edge and caught Vorlin's arm instead. For one suspended moment, both men hung above the reactor core together. Vorlin looked genuinely surprised. "You would save me?" TK stared at him, then slowly shook his head. "No," and let go. Vorlin fell silently into the reactor core below. Blue energy swallowed him instantly. No scream, no final speech, just disappearance. Then the reactor chamber erupted. "TK!" Lyra screamed. The remaining catwalk split apart beneath him as the reactor core overloaded completely. TK barely managed to grab a dangling cable while flames exploded upward through the shaft behind him. Jax reached the tram platform and turned back in horror. "TK, move." The entire reactor sector began collapsing inward around them. And somewhere above the facility, Imperial ships entered the storm. Chapter 30. Storm Above. The reactor chamber came apart beneath them. TK-346 swung violently from the dangling cable as explosions ripped through black site, Orek one level at a time. Entire sections of the catwalk collapsed into the reactor shaft below, while blue overload energy erupted upward through the chamber in blinding waves of heat and light. The support beam above him groaned loudly. Not much time. "TK." Lyra reached for him from the edge of the remaining platform. Too far away. Another explosion tore through the lower reactor conduits, shaking the entire chamber hard enough to snap several more cables overhead. Burning debris rained downward around TK as the reactor core beneath him expanded into a violent sphere of unstable energy. Jax appeared beside Lyra near the emergency tram platform. "You need to jump." TK looked upward. The distance was impossible. Even Jax knew it the second he said it. Kron shouted from the tram controls, desperately working through ignition overrides. "If the reactor breaches completely, this whole cliffside goes into the ocean." "That's not helping." Jax yelled back. TK pulled himself upward hand over hand through smoke and heat while the facility screamed around them. Every muscle burned. Every injury from the Judicator crash ripped through him again with each movement. But above him, Lyra refused to move. "Go," he shouted. "No." Another explosion shook the chamber violently. Part of the ceiling collapsed entirely, revealing flashes of the storm raging outside above the cliffside facility. Rain poured suddenly into the reactor chamber, while lightning illuminated the collapsing platforms beneath clouds of smoke and steam. And, through the opening overhead, Imperial dropships descended through the storm. Jack saw them first. Oh no! Black transports cut through the rain toward Orek, while spotlights scanned the burning facility below. Imperial reinforcements. Recovery teams weren't enough anymore. The Empire had come personally to erase everything. Kron finally activated the tram engines. The emergency vehicle roared to life along the rail line, leading deeper through the cliffs toward the ocean beyond. We have maybe 60 seconds before this tunnel collapses. Lyra ignored him completely. Her eyes remained locked on TK, hanging above the reactor shaft. Take my hand. TK almost laughed bitterly. The entire facility was dying. Imperial forces were descending from the storm overhead, and she still refused to leave him behind. Another memory surfaced suddenly. Vask standing beside him during a deployment years ago. War teaches people to survive, the old clone had said quietly while watching stormtroopers march through the rain. Rarely teaches them how to care. The memory faded. TK looked toward Lyra again, then at the approaching Imperial dropships beyond the collapsing ceiling. Something felt wrong. Too many reinforcements. Too fast. Which meant another sound echoed through the storm above. Different. Lower. Heavier. Every surviving stormtrooper inside the chamber immediately stopped moving. The dropships shifted formation midair. Even the recovery teams retreating through the upper levels suddenly repositioned themselves toward the facility entrance. Fear. TK saw it instantly. Not panic. Worse, discipline driven by terror. Then a massive black shuttle descended slowly through the burning storm clouds above Orek. Silence spread across the reactor chamber. Even the failed subjects shrieking through the lower levels seemed quieter somehow. The shuttle landed heavily atop the collapsing facility above them, and a single mechanical breathing sound echoed faintly through the comm systems. TK felt cold immediately. Jax looked upward slowly. No. Kron's expression drained completely of color. You have got to be kidding me. The breathing continued. Slow. Mechanical. Relentless. Then the overhead comm system crackled alive across the entire black site. An Imperial officer's terrified voice echoed through the speakers. Lord Vader has arrived. Silence followed. TK stared upward through the smoke and rain while the reactor chamber collapsed around them piece by piece. Vader. Not rumor. Not propaganda. Real. And suddenly everyone understood the truth at once. The Empire wasn't sending Darth Vader to contain the situation. He was here because containment had failed. And now the Empire intended to erase everything. Everyone. Kron looked toward the tram tunnel desperately. We are officially out of time. The support beam above TK snapped loudly. Lyra reached farther over the edge. TK. He looked at her, at the storm above them, at the burning reactor below, then finally made the decision. Go, he said quietly. No, Lyra, I'm not leaving you. Another explosion tore through the chamber. The catwalk beneath her feet cracked violently down the center. Jax grabbed her arm instantly. Lyra. Then, heavy footsteps echoed somewhere above the reactor sector. Slow, measured, unstoppable. And for the first time since Project Harbinger began unraveling, TK-346 felt fear stronger than death itself. Chapter 31. Lord Vader. The footsteps echoed through the collapsing facility like the sound of judgment. Slow, mechanical, deliberate. Each one reverberated through the reactor chamber beneath the constant roar of alarms and exploding machinery. Even through the smoke and steam flooding the lower levels, the presence descending through black site Orek felt suffocating somehow. The Empire itself had arrived. TK-346 finally pulled himself back onto the collapsing catwalk, just as another section broke apart behind him and vanished into the reactor core below. Lyra grabbed his arm immediately, helping drag him clear while blue overload energy erupted upward through the shaft in violent waves. Moo! Jax shouted from the tram platform. Nobody argued anymore. The group sprinted toward the emergency tram while the reactor sector tore itself apart around them. Steam blasted through ruptured conduits overhead, while stormtroopers and recovery operatives flooded into the upper facility levels above. But none of them mattered now, because every Imperial soldier inside Orek was retreating from one man. Kron slammed the tram controls fully forward the moment everyone reached the platform. The vehicle lurched violently onto the rail line, just as another explosion consumed the reactor chamber behind them. Flames chased the tram through the tunnel, while debris collapsed across the tracks only seconds after they passed. For several moments, nobody spoke. The emergency tram raced through dark underground tunnels beneath the cliffs, while red warning lights flashed endlessly overhead. Then Jax finally broke the silence. "So," he said weakly, "that was Darth Vader." Kron stared straight ahead at the controls. "I prefer the monsters." Lyra looked toward TK beside her. "You knew he'd come." TK nodded once slowly. "Not personally, but you knew this mattered to the Empire." "Yes, because Vader didn't arrive for ordinary operations. He arrived for failures, for secrets, for things the Empire feared." The tram sped around another sharp curve while tremors shook the tunnel walls around them. Blacksite Orek was collapsing rapidly now. The reactor overload had spread beyond containment. Another memory surfaced unexpectedly inside TK's thoughts. Imperial officers aboard the Judicator speaking quietly before deployment. If Lord Vader learns about Harbinger, then silence. Fear. Even then, the Empire had hidden this project from Vader until they no longer could. And now he was here to clean it up personally. The tram suddenly slowed. Kron frowned immediately. "That's not good." "What now?" Jax asked. The engineer pointed toward the tunnel ahead. The rail line ended abruptly near a massive blast door sealed directly into the cliffside. Emergency lockdown. Beyond the thick transparasteel windows built into the door, the storm-covered ocean crashed violently against black rocks far below. Freedom waited on the other side. If they could reach it. "Tell me you can open that," Lyra said. Kron jumped from the tram immediately and rushed toward the control terminal beside the blast door. "Probably." Jack sighed heavily. "I hate that word now." TK moved toward the rear of the tram instinctively, watching the darkness behind them. The tunnel stretched endlessly back toward the reactor levels beneath flickering emergency lights. Empty. For now. Then the tram lights flickered. The temperature inside the tunnel dropped instantly. Everyone felt it, even before the sound returned. Breathing. Mechanical. Slow. The footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere down the tunnel, closer than they should have been. Kron looked up from the terminal in horror. "No!" Jax turned pale immediately. How is he already here? TK already knew the answer, because Darth Vader didn't move like normal men. He advanced. Inevitable. Another tremor shook the tunnel violently, while emergency lights burst overhead in showers of sparks. Then the darkness at the far end of the tunnel shifted. A silhouette emerged slowly through the smoke. Tall, black armor, long cape trailing behind him across the tunnel floor. And then, a red lightsaber ignited. The crimson glow illuminated the tunnel instantly, while the mechanical breathing continued beneath the hum of the blade. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even Jax looked completely frozen now, because every story about Vader suddenly felt true. Not exaggerated. Not propaganda. Worse. The Dark Lord stepped forward slowly through the smoke. One-handed. Calm. Like the collapsing facility around him meant absolutely nothing. Kron desperately worked the terminal controls faster. Come on. Vader stopped several meters away from the tram. The red blade reflected across the black armor of his mask while steam curled around him from broken pipes overhead. Then he spoke. His voice sounded inhuman. Mechanical. Cold. Project Harbinger. The words echoed through the tunnel. An insult to the Empire. TK stared at him in disbelief. Not approval. Disgust. Vader looked toward the burning facility deeper inside the cliffs. Then back toward the group. The men responsible are dead. It wasn't a question. Kron slowly whispered, "I really don't think he needs questions." Then Vader's gaze settled fully on a TK. And yet, the Dark Lord continued quietly. The experiment survived. The tunnel suddenly groaned violently around them. A massive explosion thundered from the reactor levels deeper inside Orek. The blast door behind the tram unlocked halfway with a loud metallic clang. Kron looked up instantly. Almost there, Vader stepped forward again. The red blade lowered slightly toward TK. "Come here." Chapter 32. The Dark Lord. Nobody moved. The command hung in the tunnel beneath the endless mechanical breathing of Darth Vader and the distant roar of black sight Orek collapsing behind him. "Come here." The red blade cast long shadows across the tram rails while sparks drifted from broken light fixtures overhead. Smoke curled around Vader's armor in slow waves, and despite the chaos tearing through the facility around them, he stood perfectly still, perfectly controlled, like the destruction itself answered to him. TK-346 felt something primal inside him screaming to obey. Not loyalty, fear, pure instinct. Every Imperial soldier had heard stories about Vader. Entire battalions wiped out for failure. Officers executed for hesitation. Troopers vanishing after witnessing things they should not have seen. The Empire feared Vader more than death. Now TK understood why. Lyra stepped slightly in front of him instinctively. Vader's helmet turned toward her immediately. The movement alone felt dangerous. "You protect him," Vader observed. His voice remained calm, but underneath it lived something vast and terrible. Lyra tightened her grip on the rifle despite the fear visible in her eyes. "He's not yours anymore." Jax looked like he wanted to disagree with the phrasing, but wisely stayed silent. Vader studied her for one long moment, then looked back toward TK. "Is that what you believe?" TK forced himself forward slightly. Every instinct told him not to. Every survival mechanism buried into him since childhood screamed to kneel, obey, survive. But then he remembered the failed subjects, the children in containment chambers, the erased memories, Vask standing against impossible odds so the others could escape. And suddenly, the fear remained, but obedience didn't. "No," TK answered quietly. "I know it." Silence followed. The reactor explosions deeper inside the facility grew louder now. Sections of the tunnel ceiling had already begun collapsing inward, while seawater poured through widening cracks along the cliffside walls. Black Site Orek was minutes from destruction. Kron slammed his fist against the terminal desperately. "Open, you ancient piece of garbage." The blast door groaned another few feet upward. Not enough yet. Vader began walking toward them slowly. The red blade hummed softly at his side. "You were altered," Vader said calmly. "Conditioned. Reconstructed. Another step. Yet you still chose betrayal." TK stared at the black mask approaching through the smoke. "I chose for myself." The tunnel went silent. Even the reactor alarms seemed distant for one suspended moment. Then Vader stopped walking. The Dark Lord tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "That," Vader said quietly, "is why the project failed." The statement hit harder than expected, because Vader understood. Not morally, but strategically. Project Harbinger had tried to remove individuality completely. And individuality could never truly be erased. Only buried. Another violent tremor ripped through the tunnel. Part of the ceiling collapsed between Vader and the tram in an explosion of sparks and concrete. Vader did not move. The debris stopped in midair inches from his armor, then slowly fell aside. Jax stared in horror. "Nope." Kron finally got the blast door fully open behind them. Storm winds and rain exploded into the tunnel immediately from the ocean cliffs beyond. A landing platform stretched outside, overlooking the violent sea, while one small emergency shuttle remained docked near the edge of the platform. "Escape." Lyra looked toward TK urgently. "Now!" Vader stepped through the settling smoke. The red blade rose slightly. "You cannot run from the Empire." TK looked toward the shuttle, then back toward Vader, and realized instantly they wouldn't all escape in time. Vader knew it too. The Dark Lord wasn't rushing. He didn't need to, because eventually someone would have to stay behind. Another memory surfaced suddenly. Vask during training. You know the hardest part about command? The old clone had once asked quietly. TK remembered shaking his head. Vask had looked toward the younger troopers running drills beneath the rain, choosing who gets home. The memory faded. TK looked toward Lyra, toward Jax, and Kron already moving toward the shuttle through the storm outside, then finally toward Vader, and understood exactly what came next. Lyra saw it in his expression immediately. No. TK removed the blaster rifle from his shoulder slowly, handed it to her. No, you have to go. I'm not leaving you again. The words hit him hard. Again, like Vask, like everyone war forced people to leave behind. Vader continued approaching through the tunnel. Slow, certain, the embodiment of inevitability itself. TK stepped away from Lyra gently. For the first time in my life, his voice nearly disappeared beneath the storm. I get to decide something. Lyra grabbed his arm desperately. TK, the tunnel shook violently. The reactor was entering final collapse. And behind Vader, the entire facility began burning white with overload energy. Chapter 33. Hold the line. The reactor core breached. White light exploded through the tunnel behind Darth Vader as Black Site Orek began tearing itself apart from the inside out. Shockwaves thundered through the underground structure while the storm outside intensified violently. Rain and ocean spray blasting across the landing platform beyond the open blast doors. The emergency shuttle engines whined to life. Kron was already inside the cockpit screaming at systems that barely worked while Jack stood at the lowered ramp staring back toward the tunnel in disbelief. TK, he shouted through the storm. Move. TK-346 didn't turn around. His eyes remained fixed on Vader advancing slowly through the collapsing tunnel beneath the red glow of the lightsaber. Every instinct inside him still screamed to run. But underneath the fear now, there was clarity. Vader stopped several meters away. The white reactor light behind him cast enormous shadows across the ruined tunnel walls, while pieces of Orek collapsed endlessly into flame farther below. You intend to sacrifice yourself, Vader observed. Not mocking, simply stating fact. TK looked toward Lyra, beside him one final time. Rain soaked through her hair, while the storm winds whipped against the edges of the shuttle ramp behind her. I'm buying time. You cannot stop me. TK almost smiled. I know, and that was the difference. Every fight before this had been about survival. This one wasn't. He didn't need to win. He just needed Lyra to leave. Vader stepped forward again. TK raised the blaster pistol slowly. The weapon suddenly felt very small. But for the first time in his life, it belonged to him. Not the Empire. Not conditioning. Him. Vader spoke quietly through the mechanical breathing. You were designed to obey. TK tightened his grip on the pistol. No. The reactor chamber behind Vader exploded again. Fire raced through the tunnel ceiling overhead while emergency supports collapsed around them in showers of sparks and molten metal. TK looked directly into the black lenses of Vader's mask. You were. The words hung in the tunnel. For one impossible moment, Vader stopped moving. The mechanical breathing continued steadily. But something shifted. Not anger. Recognition. Because nobody spoke to Vader like that and survived. Then TK fired. The blaster bolts streaked through the tunnel toward Vader in rapid succession. Vader deflected every shot effortlessly. His red blade spun through the smoke with terrifying precision while sparks exploded across the walls around him. TK already moved. He grabbed a damaged coolant conduit beside the tunnel and fired directly into the pressure valve. The pipe ruptured instantly. Superheated steam exploded across the corridor in a violent white cloud, obscuring Vader completely while the tunnel shook beneath another reactor blast. Go! TK shouted. Lyra still didn't move. Lyra. Jax physically grabbed her arm this time. We have to leave. The shuttle ramp began lifting automatically. TK backed farther into the tunnel while steam and smoke flooded around him. Then the red glow returned through the cloud. Vader emerged slowly from the steam, completely untouched. The image burned into TK's mind instantly. Black armor, the red lightsaber, white reactor fire behind him, death walking calmly through destruction. And still, TK held his ground. Because Vask had. Because the failed subjects never got the chance. Because somebody had to choose something different. Vader raised one hand. The Force slammed into TK instantly. Invisible pressure hurled him violently backward against the tunnel wall hard enough to crack concrete behind him. Pain exploded through his spine as the pistol flew from his hand and disappeared into the smoke. The shuttle ramp lifted higher behind him. Almost closed. Vader advanced. TK forced himself upright again, despite the pain tearing through his body. The Vader lowered his blade slightly. You continue resisting the inevitable. TK coughed blood onto the tunnel floor. Yeah, then smiled weakly despite everything. That's kind of the point. Another reactor explosion ripped through Orek. This one much closer. The tunnel ceiling split open overhead, while flames surged through the structure behind Vader. Sections of the landing platform outside began collapsing toward the ocean cliffs beneath the storm. The shuttle engines roared louder. Lyra stood at the narrowing ramp entrance, staring at TK through rain and smoke. He looked back at her one final time and mouthed silently, "Go." The ramp sealed shut. The shuttle lifted into the storm. For the first time since Project Harbinger began unraveling, TK-346 stood completely alone. Chapter 34. More than a number. The shuttle disappeared into the storm. TK-346 watched its lights vanish beyond the rain and ocean mist while the landing platform beneath his feet continued collapsing piece by piece into the violent sea below. For one brief moment, relief cut through the fear. Lyra escaped. That was enough. Behind him, Darth Vader advanced through the burning tunnel without hurry, his red lightsaber illuminating the smoke in violent flashes while black sight Orek died around them. The reactor had gone critical now. Not minutes left. Seconds. The facility groaned like something enormous collapsing under its own weight. Entire sections of the cliffside structure tore away into the ocean beneath thunder and flame, while seawater flooded through shattered walls deeper inside the base. Still, Vader walked forward. Unaffected. Unstoppable. TK forced himself upright despite the pain ripping through his ribs and spine. Blood ran down the side of his face from where the Force had thrown him into the tunnel wall, and every breath hurt now. But strangely, the fear had faded. Not because Vader seemed less terrifying. Because for the first time in his life, TK knew exactly why he was standing here. No orders. No conditioning. No number telling him what he was supposed to be. Just choice. Vader stopped several feet away near the edge of the ruined landing platform, while rain hammered against his armor beneath flashes of lightning overhead. You sacrificed yourself for traitors. TK shook his head slowly. No. The ocean crashed violently against the cliffs below. I did it for people. The red blade hummed softly through the storm. Vader stared at him silently behind the black mask, then spoke. You believe yourself free. TK laughed weakly despite the blood in his mouth. Don't you? The question lingered in the rain, and suddenly TK understood something terrible. Vader hated Project Harbinger because it failed. Not because it was cruel, because it tried to manufacture what fear already created naturally. Obedience. The Empire didn't need Harbinger anymore. It had successfully created a new order with Vader leading the way in a path of destruction. Another section of the platform collapsed into the ocean beneath them. The reactor fire inside Orek burned brighter now, white energy erupting through the cliffside tunnels behind Vader in violent bursts. TK looked toward the storm-covered horizon where the shuttle disappeared, then back toward the Dark Lord. You know what scares the Empire most? Vader remained silent. People who choose for themselves. Lightning flashed overhead. For the first time since they met, Vader's breathing slowed slightly, almost thoughtful. Then Vader pointed his lightsaber at TK. The crimson blade illuminated the rain between them. You speak as if choice removes the feeling of guilt. The statement hit harder than TK expected. Because it was true. Nothing erased what Black Echo Squad had done. Nothing erased the villages burned under Imperial orders. Nothing erased the lives destroyed while TK followed commands without question. He would carry that forever. TK looked downward briefly at the shattered stormtrooper helmet lying near the edge of the platform. The number painted across the side barely remained visible beneath scorch marks and seawater. TK-346. Not a name, a designation, a tool. Then he looked back toward Vader. No, TK answered quietly. It just means the guilt finally belongs to me. Silence followed. The reactor core screamed somewhere beneath the cliffs. Then the entire platform shook violently as Orek entered final collapse. Huge cracks spread beneath the metal flooring around them, while seawater exploded upward through the structure below. The facility was about to go. Vader stepped forward one final time. The red blade rose. TK didn't move, didn't run, because survival did not matter the moment Lyra escaped. And somehow, that felt peaceful. Vader stopped directly in front of him, towering, mechanical breathing filling the storm around them. You were more useful as a soldier. TK almost smiled. Yeah. Rain poured down across both of them while the ocean roared beneath the collapsing cliffside. But I think I like being free from the Empire more. Free to be my true self, even for a few seconds. And in TK's final moment, before Vader's lightsaber struck his neck, TK-346 stood facing Darth Vader not as a stormtrooper, but as himself, finally free to determine his own fate.